Hi guys, and welcome to Last Light Radio Channel. Tonight we slip into the dark hush before dawn in Mississippi, where the air hangs thick over the cotton fields and the cabins sit in rows like tired shadows. You can almost hear the first rooster shaking the silence apart, and smell damp earth rising through the night mist. What did it really mean to open your eyes here as a black woman in 1850, in a place built on forced labour, fear, and relentless routine? The truth is not neat, and it is not distant. It is close enough to feel in your bare feet on a cold plank floor. So, before you settle into the story, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, and while you are here, comment with your location and your local time. Now, dim the lights. You wake in darkness so complete it feels almost solid, as if the room itself has weight. For a few seconds there is only breath, yours and everyone else's, low and steady in the cabin air. Then the world begins to separate into familiar pieces. A child shifts on a straw tick. Someone near the door coughs into the crook of an arm. From outside comes the scrape of a shoe over packed dirt, followed by the thin, restless cry of a waking baby from another cabin. Morning is not here yet, but it is already coming for you. The cabin smells of pine smoke, damp wool, stale ash, and the human closeness of too many people under one roof. The walls are rough, the chinks between the logs stuffed with clay and scraps where they can be, though the wind still finds its sly little paths in colder months. In summer the heat settles early and stays late, turning the room heavy before sunrise. In winter the chill bites through cloth and skin alike. Either way, comfort is a visitor who rarely stays long. You lie still for one last moment, listening. This is not laziness. This is measurement. You're judging time by sound. No clock hangs on the wall. Naturally, few enslaved people on Mississippi plantations owned time in any formal sense. The day is kept by bells, horns, the rising light, and the movements of those who claim the right to command. On many plantations, the workday begins before dawn and stretches until after dusk during the busy seasons, especially in cotton country. That part, grimly enough, is one of the better documented facts of plantation life. Then comes the call outside, maybe a horn, maybe a bell, maybe the voice of a driver carrying through the dark. Whatever shape it takes, it means the same thing. Up now. You push yourself from the bedding, feet touching the floorboards that are cool and splintery under your soles. The fabric on your body is coarse and rubbed thin in places. A plantation-issued clothing rarely aims for fit or softness. It aims for utility, or at least the owner's idea of it. For women, that often means a plain dress of Osnaburg or homespun wool in colder weather, rough cloth that scratches the neck and wrists. The garments can be patched, turned, reused, and handed down until even the cloth seems tired of itself. There is no leisurely waking here. You move by memory more than sight. A hand finds a kerchief, fingers smooth the hem of a dress. Hair is tied back as neatly as circumstances allow. You check on the smallest child near you, pressing a palm to a warm forehead, adjusting a blanket edge, committing one more detail to your mind before the day scatters everyone in different directions. Even tenderness must work quickly. Outside, the quarters are beginning to stir. Doors open one by one, spilling out figures into the faint blue edge of approaching morning. The ground feels damp. The scent of wet soil rises strong after a night of river humidity. Mississippi plantations often sat near water routes or rich alluvial land, especially in the fertile counties where cotton expanded with alarming speed in the first half of the 19th century. Rich land for planters meant punishing labour for the people forced to work it. That arithmetic was simple, cruel, and very profitable. You step into a lane between cabins. A cooking fire somewhere sends up a ribbon of smoke that smells sharp and resinous. Another woman lifts a pot lid and steam ghosts into the pre-dawn air. Breakfast, if it is ready, is plain and practical. Cornmeal mush, maybe a piece of cold pone, perhaps molasses, perhaps not. Sometimes bacon or salt pork in small amounts, though not always. Rations vary by plantation, by season, by the temperament of management. which is an unpleasant phrase but a useful one. Human survival here can hinge on whether a man with a ledger wakes up stingy or merely indifferent. You are hungry before the first bite. Hunger is regular company, not always famine, though that can come, but the smaller constant kind, the kind that teaches the body not to expect enough. You eat quickly, because speed matters. There may be children to settle, water to fetch, embers to stir, a scrap of cloth to tie around a little head, a whispered instruction to an older girl who will help watch the younger ones until the day sorts itself out. And here is one of the quiet distortions of plantation records. A great many documents reduce women to labour units, field hands, breeders, servants, numbers in inventories. Yet the morning reveals what the ledgers flattened. Before the official workday even begins, much has already been done. Fire tended, food shared, children steadied, clothing adjusted, comfort given, worry swallowed. The sky lightens by degrees, grey first, then silver. Birds begin their hard, cheerful chatter from the trees, as if this were an ordinary morning in an ordinary place. Nature, maddeningly enough, does not always match human conditions. The mockingbird does not moderate its song because someone is afraid. The cicadas do not lower their volume out of respect for exhaustion. You hear them anyway, loud and insistent once the weather turns warm, filling the plantation air with a sound so constant it almost becomes a second silence. Around you, women move with practiced economy. Some are young, not long past girlhood, though forced labour has a way of aging posture before it ages the face. Some are older, carrying the authority of survival in the set of the shoulders and the directness of the eyes. A few may be pregnant because pregnancy did not excuse labour in any generous sense. Many enslaved women in Mississippi were expected to work through much of pregnancy and return to work soon after childbirth. This was not an unfortunate exception. It was routine. You join the stream of bodies heading toward assignment. In the quarters there can be soft talk, but closer to work the atmosphere tightens. The plantation day runs on surveillance. Overseers, drivers, owners, mistresses, children of the owning family, guests, neighbours. Eyes exist everywhere. A woman learns to read mood quickly, the distance in a man's stride, the edge in a voice, the silence that can mean danger. Some threats announce themselves, others stroll in smiling. Historians still debate how much freedom enslaved people had to shape their domestic lives within the quarters, because the evidence shifts from plantation to plantation, and the surviving records were so often written by owners with selective eyesight. But in the small gap between official control and lived reality, black women built habits of order and care that no inventory book could fully map. A swept doorstep, a wrapped headcloth chosen with pride, a nickname murmured with affection, a song begun low in the throat while the sky is still dim. Song matters. You hear it sometimes in fragments at this hour. Not a performance, but a thread. One voice hums while hands work, another catches the tune, then lets it go. Spirituals, work songs, improvised melodies, remembered rhythms shaped by African and African-American traditions all moved through plantation life. Not every morning is musical. Some mornings are too tired even for that. But sound remains a form of company. There are also details the records barely mention. The little human things that survive in oral histories and scattered accounts. A woman might warm a stone near the fire and tuck it into bedding for a child who will wake later. Someone may hide a treasured button, shell, bead, or ribbon scrap in a box or cloth bundle, not because it is useful, but because beauty has not entirely surrendered. On some plantations, enslaved people planted small patches near their cabins when permitted, raising greens, herbs, or a few vegetables. A bit of onion smell clinging to the fingers could mean supper later, might carry flavour instead of mere fuel. Luxury is a large word for such a thing, but the nose might disagree. Mississippi in 1850 is deep in the cotton kingdom. By then the state is one of the central engines of American cotton production, and cotton is not just a crop, it is a system, a demand, a schedule, a logic that reaches into every hour of your day. The fields do not care that you are tired. The market does not care that your child coughed all night. Profit has a famously poor bedside manner. As daylight grows stronger, the plantation reveals itself more plainly. Cabins in rows, smoke climbing straight up if the air is still, fences, sheds, perhaps a gin house in the distance. The big house set apart, larger, painted maybe, claiming gentility in a landscape made by coercion. Mud clings to shoes after rain, dust coats ankles in dry weather. In summer the light turns fierce early, pressing heat against your skin before breakfast has settled. In winter the dawn can feel metallic, with frost on the ground and fingers stiff around every task. You stand among others waiting for directions. Waiting becomes one of the great skills of the enslaved, though skill is too flattering a word. It is endurance disguised as patience. You wait to be counted, sorted, sent. Mothers glance for one last time at children too young to join full labour. Younger girls watch older women closely, learning not only tasks but timing, restraint, and the art of appearing composed when the stomach knots. There is gentle sarcasm in the idea that planters like to praise order on their estates. Order for whom? Exactly. For the people in charge? Perhaps. For the people being driven, it is more like a managed storm. Still, the morning has its own rhythm. Feet on dirt, tin cup against bucket, murmured prayers, the rustle of skirts and the slap of worn shoes. A rooster announcing himself as if he personally organised the sun. Prayer may come aloud or silently. A whispered "Lord help me," a line from scripture carried in memory, a phrase inherited from an elder. Christianity had spread widely among enslaved communities by 1850, though religious life often blended biblical teachings with older African continuities and local custom. Some owners encouraged controlled worship, others feared its independence. Either way, faith could become a private room inside the mind. One no overseer could enter fully. A scholarly dispute remains over how closely daily plantation routines matched the neat schedules described in owners' journals, because first-hand testimony from formerly enslaved people often reveals a messier, harsher, more improvised reality than those polished records suggest. That uncertainty matters. It reminds you that even history has to squint through smoke sometimes. The people with pens were usually not the people with blisters, and you, this morning, have blisters, or old calluses, or a back already sore from yesterday. Perhaps your hands are nicked from washing, mending, carrying, pulling, lifting. Plantation labour for women was rarely limited to one category. Even if assigned primarily to field work, a black woman in Mississippi could still face cooking, cleaning, spinning, sewing, nursing, hauling water, tending children, feeding poultry, or any other task someone higher up decided belonged to her. Dawn does not ask which burden you prefer. It simply opens the door and lets them all in. For one suspended second, the sun edges above the horizon and paints the cabin roofs with pale gold. The beauty is almost rude. It arrives without apology. Light touches the trees, the churned yard, the smoke, the faces around you. Somebody yawns and covers it. Somebody else shifts a baby higher on one hip. Somewhere a laugh breaks out, brief and bright, because human beings are unreasonable enough to laugh even here, especially here. That laugh matters too. It tells you that life in the quarters is not a flat picture of suffering, though suffering is real and constant. It is also wit, memory, gossip, skill, vanity, flirting, grief, hunger, patience, and stubbornness before breakfast. It is women measuring cornmeal with one hand and a risk with the other. It is waking in a place designed to strip away selfhood, and still, somehow, stepping outside with a self intact enough to greet another woman by name. The morning order is given. The day has truly begun now. Air fills your chest, warm already, and you take the first steps into labour with the smell of smoke still in your hair and the taste of cornmeal lingering on your tongue. Behind you, the cabin cools and darkens again. Ahead, the fields wait under the climbing Mississippi sun. The line of women and men stretches thin across the edge of the field as morning lifts itself into full view. You step off the packed yard and into the cottonland, where the soil is dark, rich, and already beginning to warm under your feet. Dew clings to the leaves in tiny beads, wetting the hem of your dress as you move. At first the air is almost pleasant, soft with the smell of earth and green growth. That kindness does not last. A plantation field in Mississippi in 1850 is not a quiet pastoral scene, no matter how lovingly a planter might describe it in a letter. It is a workplace arranged around pressure. Cotton spreads in long rows that seem orderly from a distance, but once you enter them, the order feels more like confinement. Plants rise around your knees and thighs, depending on the season, and the rows guide your body forward like channels. You bend, reach, pull, drop, step, and begin again. The rhythm comes quickly because it has to. In many Mississippi plantations, black women worked in the fields alongside men and older children, especially in cotton production. That is one of the plain facts history leaves with little room for debate. Enslaved women were expected to hoe, plant, weed, and pick, all while carrying the same weight of surveillance and punishment as everyone else, plus burdens that were distinctly gendered. The field does not spare you because you are female. The plantation system has no sentimental weakness for that. At this hour, the sun is still low enough to throw long shadows between the rows. You hear the first real sounds of a labour settle into place. Hoes bite the dirt with a dry chop. Shoes scuff over loosened soil. Someone clears a throat. Somewhere farther down. A baby cries from a shaded spot at the field edge, watched for the moment by an older child or an elderly woman too frail for heavy labour. That cry can pull at your chest like a hooked thread, but your hands keep moving. They must. The overseer rides or walks where he can see the pace. On some plantations, the driver, often an enslaved man forced into authority over others, keeps the line moving. That position is cruelly complicated, hated by some, feared by many, and never simple. Power on plantations rarely arrives in clean shapes. It comes bent and ugly, passing downward through threat and necessity. You learn not just who commands, but how command travels. Your hands work the hoe handle until the wood presses grooves into your palms. The soil smells strong when broken open, almost sweet in places, mixed with the scent of roots and the faint sourness of standing water where drainage is poor. Mosquitoes rise from damp ground and circle your wrists, your neck, the corners of your eyes. Gnats drift in shimmering little clouds. Mississippi gives you fertile land. Yes, and in exchange it offers insects with military discipline. By mid-morning the light hardens. The softness is gone now. Heat gathers on the back of your neck and under your headcloth. Sweat slips down your spine, catches at the waist, dampens the fabric under your arms. Dust clings where the sweat settles. You wipe your forehead with the back of your wrist and leave a dark streak of soil near the temple. A glamorous look, obviously. Plantation chic does not catch on, for reasons that are not difficult to understand. The work changes with the season. In planting time, you move with measured care, spacing seed as ordered. In chopping season, you thin and hoe, keeping the weeds down before they choke the crop. In picking season, you pull fluffy white cotton from the burrs until your fingers sting and split. The burrs can scratch like little claws, and the fibres cling to rough skin. Cotton looks soft in a bowl. In the hand, under quota, it becomes something else. Quotas matter. On many plantations, especially large cotton operations, workers were expected to meet daily amounts. Those numbers could rise as the season progressed, or as the crop demanded more. Falling short could bring punishment, humiliation, reduced rations, or extra labour. Success did not usually bring comfort. It often brought a higher expectation the next day. Efficiency is a trap when the person counting your output owns your body. You bend again, straighten, move forward, bend again. Soon the movement stops feeling like a choice. It becomes an argument between muscle and will. Your lower back throbs in a dull, spreading line. The ache settles into your shoulders. Your fingers feel swollen. The field teaches the body its own geography of pain. Every task has a place it marks. Women in the field often had to manage not just labour, but labour while watched through the lens of gender. A man might be judged for strength and speed. A woman could be judged for those, and for posture, expression, obedience, fertility, and sexual vulnerability all at once. The plantation never really let those categories separate. Work and control move together. The field might look open, but privacy is almost non-existent. Exposure is part of the system. A breeze comes now and then, light as a promise, carrying the smell of sunlit leaves and distant mud from a creek bank. For a few moments it cools your face. Then it passes and the heat closes again. You hear a woman nearby begin a low tune, barely louder than breath. It is not cheerful exactly, but steady. Songs in the field can mark rhythm, carry feeling, disguise complaint, or simply keep a mind from fraying. Sometimes the words are improvised. Sometimes they carry a religious line. Sometimes they are so layered with double meaning that the person listening from horseback hears almost nothing at all. One quirky detail from plantation accounts is that some owners boasted about how well women picked cotton compared with men, praising quick fingers and endurance as if this were a charming compliment rather than a confession of exploitation. You can almost admire the nerve of it. Exploit someone thoroughly, then write admiringly of her skill. Human self-deception is a remarkably durable crop. Around noon, if the schedule allows or there's a break brief enough to feel almost theoretical, you settle where shade can be found, under a tree if one stands near enough, or beside a wagon, fence, or tool shed. The ground is hot on top and cool just underneath when you press a palm into it. Food appears in modest forms: cornbread, salt pork, cold sweet potatoes if fortune has smiled faintly, maybe buttermilk, though that depends on the plantation and the day. You eat because the body needs fuel, not because the meal offers delight. Still, hunger sharpens gratitude for even a plain bite. Conversation during such pauses can be low, quick, practical. Someone comments on the weather. Someone asks after a sick child. Someone slips in a joke so dry it nearly blows away. Laughter comes out tired but real. Women trade information in these moments. Whose baby has a fever? Which patch of herbs still grows near the quarters? Whether the mistress is in a foul temper? Which route the overseer rode this morning? Knowledge is never abstract here. It is survival in spoken form. Historians still argue over the exact balance between gang labour and task-based variations on Mississippi plantations, because practices differed by size, crop, and management style. In many cotton operations, gang labour dominated, with groups moving together under close supervision. Yet the lived experience could vary more than neat categories suggest. Some women recalled moments of relative autonomy in pace or method. Others described relentless regimentation. The truth, frustratingly enough, refuses to stay in a single tidy box. The break ends. Of course it does. Afternoon is the long test. Morning at least carries freshness, however brief. Afternoon carries knowledge. By then you know how hot it will get. You know what remains. You know how much strength has already been spent. The sun in Mississippi can feel personal, as if it has selected your shoulders for special attention. Light flashes off leaves. Air ripples over the rows. The smell of hot vegetation thickens until it turns almost bitter. Your dress sticks to your back. Dust cakes your ankles. The inside of your shoes, if you have shoes fit for field work, rubs at the heel. Some women work barefoot part of the time, though that brings its own injuries from stubble, stone, and hard ground. The touch of the plants changes as the day goes on. Morning dew made them cool. Now they scratch warm against your calves. Tiny prickles lodge in the skin. Sweat dries in salt patches. The body becomes both tool and evidence. Pregnant women often remained in the fields far longer than any humane standard would allow. Some testimonies from slavery describe women pausing to give birth and returning to labour with shocking speed. Not because they were superhuman, because the system was monstrous. That distinction matters. Admiration for endurance should never blur into admiration for the conditions that demanded it. Across the field, children old enough for light labour move in smaller tasks. They carry water, mind younger ones, pick up dropped cotton, scare birds, or learn the motions they will be forced to repeat for years. A girl watches an older woman with serious eyes, measuring how to grip, how to bend without falling, how to endure without displaying too much of what she feels. Education takes strange forms here. Some lessons come from books. Some come from the angle of a spine in heat. Now and then the field holds a softer sensory world beneath the hardship. Wild flowers near the ditch, dragonflies skimming over a wet patch, the clean smell after a sudden shower, thunderheads piling in the distance like dark mountains of wool. Mississippi weather can turn quickly, and when rain breaks over the land, the sound on leaves is loud and immediate. Mud sucks at your shoes. Clothing clings cold for a while, then turns clammy as the heat returns. Work may pause briefly in heavy weather, but not out of kindness, only because soaked ground, lightning, or damaged crops force a calculation. There is also the constant mathematics of bodily risk. Too slow, and punishment threatens. Too tired, and mistakes multiply. Too outspoken, and notice falls on you. Too attractive, and another sort of notice may fall, which is often worse. Too ill, and you may be accused of pretending. Too strong, and more is expected. Plantation logic leaves very little room for a woman simply to exist. And still, women developed expertise, real expertise. How to spot a weed at a glance, how to conserve one corner of strength while spending another, how to wrap sore fingers with cloth scraps when no proper bandage is given, how to lift a sack without wasting motion, how to sip water so it lasts, how to keep a child calm at the field edge with one phrase, one look, one lullaby fragment carried on the wind. One little noted tidbit appears in scattered recollections. Some women chewed bits of root, leaf, or resin for relief from thirst, nausea, or fatigue when they knew useful plants. Herbal knowledge travelled quietly through enslaved communities, often kept by older women and passed in practical whispers. Owners might dismiss such knowledge as superstition until they needed a remedy themselves, which feels very on brand for the period. Late afternoon begins not with coolness, but with a subtle shift in colour. The light turns thicker, more gold than white. Shadows lengthen between the rows. The field smells baked now, almost dusty sweet where dry cotton and crushed leaves mix together. You are beyond hunger for a while, in that strange place where the body stops asking and simply continues. Your arms feel mechanical, your back burns, your thoughts drift in and out, catching on details. A hawk circling high, the squeak of a wagon wheel, the click of insects starting up in the grass. Some women in the field are old enough to remember places farther east, sold south in the internal slave trade that fed Mississippi's booming plantations. Being sold down the river was no figure of speech. It was a life rupture. By 1850, Mississippi had been shaped deeply by that forced migration, which tore families apart and relocated thousands into the expanding cotton frontier. In the field, accents, memories, and cooking habits might quietly reveal who came from Virginia, Maryland, the Carolinas, or Louisiana. The rows hold many geographies. A scholarly uncertainty remains around how often planters exaggerated women's productivity in account books to enhance property values, secure loans, or display managerial success. Numbers survive, yes, but numbers on plantations were never innocent. They served markets as much as memory. A woman listed as prime field hand might also be nursing a baby, grieving a child sold away, or carrying a fever. None of that fits neatly in a ledger line. At last the order comes to stop, not freedom. Merely stopping. You straighten slowly, and the spine protests the decision. The field looks different when you rise to full height, as if you have been under water all day and only now break the surface. The horizon widens. The sky seems enormous. Nearby faces are filmed with sweat and dust. Dresses are stained darker at the waist and under the arms. Hands are roughened, streaked, tired beyond easy description. Yet, in this moment, as the line loosens and bodies begin to turn homeward, there is an unmistakable shift. The field has had you all day. It does not have your evening yet. You walk back with dirt on your hem and the smell of sun-baked cotton clinging to your skin. Crickets begin their evening music from the edges of the path. Frogs start up in wetter ground. The air remains warm, but the direct heat has withdrawn its sharpest knife. Every step toward the quarters feels heavy. Every step also feels earned. The day in the field has taken its share. It has asked for strength, speed, caution, silence, endurance, and the surrender of comfort. It has measured your body against a crop and called that economy. But as you leave the rows behind, something stubborn still travels with you. Something the field could not hoe out or weigh in a sack. Call it will. Call it self. Call it the quiet refusal to become only labour in somebody else's book. The light lowers over Mississippi, and the rows fade from bright green to shadowed lines. Your hands still twitch with the memory of repetitive motion. Your shoulders ache with each breath. Somewhere ahead, smoke is already rising from cook fires. Evening work waits, naturally. Plantations adore a full schedule. Still, for these few steps between field and cabin, the sky opens above you in bands of gold and violet, and the earth smells of dust, grass, and cooling leaves. You carry the whole hard day in your muscles as you walk. By the time you cross the yard toward the big house, the sun has climbed high enough to bleach colour from everything it touches. The white paint on the main house glares in the light. Window glass flashes. Steps shine. Even the gravel path seems to throw heat back at your face. The place is meant to look orderly, graceful, civilized. That is the performance. Underneath it, the work never stops. For a black woman assigned to domestic labour on a Mississippi plantation in 1850, the house is not a refuge from hardship. It is a different kind of pressure chamber, inside. The floors are smoother, the furniture finer, the curtains cleaner, the dishes more delicate. None of that softens the labour. It only adds breakable objects, sharper expectations, and closer surveillance. A field hand may work under open sky. A house servant works under eyes. The first thing you notice indoors is the change in smell. Outside, the air carries dirt, grass, sweat, and wood smoke. Inside, the scents stack on top of one another in layers. Beeswax polish, stale fireplace ash, damp laundry, soap made from lye, meat fat from the kitchen, flour dust, vinegar, perfume trailing after the mistress, wet wool drying on hooks, lamp oil, sometimes sickness, sharp and sour in a bedchamber, sometimes flowers in a bowl, trying very hard to suggest gentility. The house smells busy, not peaceful. You begin where you're told. Perhaps it is the kitchen first, perhaps the washyard, perhaps the nursery, the dining room, the spinning room, the pantry, the dairy, or the mistress's chamber. Domestic labour on plantations often demanded constant switching between tasks. Cooking alone could absorb an entire day. So could laundry. So could caring for children who were not yours. Especially when the owners wished to imagine that comfort simply appeared by magic. In large households, labour might be divided among several enslaved women and girls. In smaller ones, one person could be expected to do nearly everything with impossible speed. She cooked, scrubbed, ironed, mended, fetched water, carried trays, emptied slops, aired bedding, polished silver, cleaned lamps, and tended children. The category of housework sounds tidy when written down. In practice it was endless. The kitchen is often its own world, separate from the main house or attached at a distance because of heat and fire risk. You step into air already thick with warmth. Iron pots hang blackened over the hearth. Ash lies fine as grey flour on the bricks. The smell is powerful here. Salt pork, cornmeal, grease, boiling greens, wood smoke caught in your hair and sleeves. A cook must think ahead all the time. What needs to boil first? What can be baked later? How much flour remains? Whether the milk turned? Whether the mistress wants a lighter bread today because she woke with a complaint? Plantation households could be as demanding as royalty and far less charming. Cooking required real skill. That part often goes understated when people imagine plantation kitchens as simple spaces of rough labour. They were rough. They also demanded memory, timing, judgment, and adaptability. A black woman in charge of preparing meals might manage several fires at once, stretch limited ingredients, preserve food, butcher poultry, bake bread, season stews, and produce dishes for the owner's table, while also feeding the enslaved community in some fashion depending on the plantation system. Such labour supported the entire estate, and yet the cook received no applause at the end. No neat little round of appreciation from the dining room. What she often received instead was blame if a roast dried out, if cream curdled, if biscuits fell flat, or if a child of the household pushed away a plate with aristocratic gloom. It is remarkable how fragile some wealthy people's satisfaction can be. Entire systems of forced labour, and still the chicken is somehow not moist enough. You lift an iron pot and feel the weight drag through your arms and shoulders. Heat from the hearth strikes your face so sharply it dries sweat almost as soon as it forms. Your palms sting from handles and rough cloth. Smoke makes your eyes water. Summer turns kitchens into furnaces, and Mississippi summers show very little mercy. The air presses inward. The walls seem to hold heat rather than block it. Breathing feels like drinking from a warm cup. Laundry is another universe of labour. If this is washing day, the work begins with hauling water in buckets that bite into the fingers and dampen your skirt as they swing. Water must be heated, soap prepared, basins filled, clothes sorted, stains rubbed, linens boiled, shirts scrubbed against washboards or worked hard by hand, then wrung, shaken, hung, dried, gathered, folded, ironed. Ironing means heating heavy irons and swapping them out as they cool. It means standing for long stretches over cloth that belongs to people who may scarcely notice it exists unless a wrinkle offends them. Lye soap roughens the skin quickly. Hands chap, crack, and sting. Fingernails split, knuckles redden, fabric rasps over sore fingers. Clean linen has its own scent, somewhere between sunlight and soap, but the process of getting there is harsh. The steam from the wash kettle dampens your face and curls loose hairs under the headcloth. Wet sheets slap against your forearms with cold weight before the heat returns. There is no dainty version of this work. Some plantation records reveal that enslaved women produced much of the clothing they later had to wash and repair. Spinning, weaving, sewing, cutting, patching, and mending could all fall into women's labour routines, especially on plantations that tried to reduce costs by manufacturing coarse garments on site. Imagine that circle of labour. You make the cloth, stitch the dress, wash the dress, mend the dress, wear the dress until it froze, then patch it again. Efficiency, the planter would say. Exhaustion, the woman would say, if she were free to say it plainly. Needlework demands a different posture of endurance. Instead of broad movements, there is tiny precision. Eyes strain in dimmer light, fingers pinch and guide, needles flash in and out of coarse cloth, shirts split at seams because field labour tears them. Children's garments need letting out or taking in. Towels wear thin, aprons stain, sheets must be hemmed, buttons replaced. Some enslaved women were highly valued for sewing skills and worked as seamstresses for the owner's family, producing dresses, shirts, undergarments, caps, and decorative items. This might keep a woman out of the field, but it did not keep her safe from overwork or control. Indoors, the demands simply became more exact. The big house also contains children, and children create work like a spring creates water. There is always more. If you're assigned to the nursery, your day fills with carrying, rocking, washing faces, changing cloths, calming fussing, tidying toys, chasing little shoes, and responding to calls from the mistress that arrive with sharp impatience. Enslaved women were frequently required to nurse or care for white children, while their own children remained in the quarters under older siblings or elders. The emotional distortion of that arrangement is difficult to overstate. You soothe one child while worrying over another you cannot see. A crying white infant in a cool bedroom may receive immediate attention. A black woman's own baby, left farther away, may have to wait. That split could wound deeply. Testimonies from slavery often describe mothers torn between required duties and maternal fear. A child with fever, a child near a pond, a child hungry too early, a child under the eye of someone careless. Every minute away could grow teeth in the mind. There is also service at table, which looks graceful only if you are not the person doing it. You carry platters, refill glasses, move quietly behind chairs, clear crumbs, and remain alert to every gesture. Dining rooms are stages for the planter class, places where hospitality and status are displayed through food, silver, china, and smooth performance. An enslaved woman serving there becomes part of the scenery by force, present, necessary, and expected not to be fully human in the eyes of the guests. You learn the sounds of that room, fork against china, chair legs scraping, the low rise and fall of conversation about crops, prices, politics, horses, marriages, and neighbours. Sometimes the talk touches slavery with the casual tone people reserve for weather or tools. It is always peculiar to hear a person discuss your life as an abstract principle while reaching for another biscuit. Some women working indoors had to sleep near their tasks rather than in the quarters, especially nurses, maids, or trusted servants. Owners called this trust, naturally. The word sounds nicer than constant availability. To be kept close to the household often meant longer hours, less privacy, and greater vulnerability to sudden demands at night. A bell rings, a floorboard creaks, a child whimpers, a visitor arrives late, someone wants tea, someone wants hot bricks for the bed, someone wants a shawl found this instant. Human beings with power can become astonishingly helpless about minor inconveniences. Historians still disagree about whether domestic placement offered meaningful advantages compared with field labour, because the answer changed with the household, the owner, and the specific task. Some formerly enslaved women described slightly better clothing, more regular access to food scraps, or shelter from the weather. Others emphasized sexual danger, emotional strain, sleep deprivation, and the pressure of constant scrutiny. Any broad claim that house servants had it easier begins to crumble once the details arrive, and the details are everything. The mistress may pride herself on refinement while monitoring every movement of the women who maintain that refinement. She checks dust on mantelpieces, comments on collars, criticizes folded linens, and expects obedience wrapped in invisibility. Her dependence on enslaved labour can make her gratitude seem unnecessary in her own mind. Why thank the system she believes is natural at most? A house servant may receive a clipped acknowledgement, a cast-off dress, a special task, or a warning disguised as advice. Kindness, when it appears, is tangled with ownership. It cannot be clean. That tension grows sharper in spaces of bodily intimacy. Bathing children, dressing the mistress, fastening stays, brushing hair, changing bed linens after illness, emptying chamber pots, cleaning blood from cloth after childbirth, washing vomit from blankets. Domestic labour reached into the most private corners of plantation life. Enslaved women touched what respectable society pretended not to mention. They knew who snored, who drank too much, who quarrelled at night, who feared storms, who hid letters, who coughed blood into handkerchiefs. The household may have imagined itself dignified. The women who cleaned it knew better. One curious tidbit appears in some recollections and plantation descriptions. Cooks and maids sometimes learned news earlier than anyone else because newspapers, letters, and visiting gossip drifted through the house before spreading outward. A woman dusting a side table might hear about elections, cotton prices, steamboat accidents, marriages, deaths, or rumours of slave sales without anyone bothering to lower their voice. People often reveal the most when they assume no one important is listening. It is one of history's quieter ironies that access to information could matter, not in some dramatic movie fashion every day, but in practical ways. Knowing an owner planned a journey, expected guests, or discussed selling people could alter how a woman measured the next few days. Information was not freedom, it was still valuable. A whispered warning passed between women could change who hid a keepsake, who comforted whom, who braced for trouble. Work in the dairy or smokehouse carried its own sensory world. Cool milk rooms smelled sour-sweet, with a chill that felt almost luxurious in hot weather. Smokehouses held the dense scent of curing meat and old salt. Pantries smelled of dried apples, molasses, flour sacks, onion skins, and mice if the cats had missed their duties. Storerooms had to be watched carefully. Plantation owners obsessed over theft, though their moral clarity on ownership had obvious blind spots. A missing ham could provoke outrage from a man who owned hundreds of human beings. Perspective was not their strongest gift. In the washyard, the kitchen, the nursery, the hall, the sewing room, and the cellar, black women developed systems of quiet communication. A look, a brief phrase, a bit of humour under the breath. Shared irritation could take the shape of a tiny pause or a glance so expressive it required no words. Laughter had to be managed carefully indoors, but it survived. So did style. A head wrap tied neatly, a song hummed while kneading dough, a recipe altered just enough to taste like home rather than only labour. A scholarly uncertainty remains about how much culinary influence enslaved women exercised over plantation tables in Mississippi, because recipe records often credit mistresses while erasing the black cooks who actually developed, adapted, and executed the food. Yet it is difficult to imagine southern plantation cuisine without the knowledge, taste, and labour of those women. The menu may carry the mistress's name in a notebook. The meal carries someone else's hands. Late in the day, the house shifts tone. Light angles across polished floors. Shadows stretch along walls. The dining room needs laying out. Lamps need trimming. Water pitchers need filling. Children grow fretful. The mistress may grow sharp with fatigue. Visitors may arrive, adding another layer of performance. A domestic worker's body by then often feels split into sections. Back aching from lifting, feet burning from standing, hands raw from hot water and soap, head buzzing from too many instructions held at once. Still, the work continues with practiced grace because grace is demanded. A tray carried steadily, a bed turned down neatly, a floor swept without streaks, ash removed from a grate, shoes brushed, towels folded, candle stubs replaced. The plantation house depends on this invisible choreography. Every polished surface rests on someone's labour, every fresh shirt, every warm meal, every quiet nursery, every appearance of comfort. And as evening thickens, the rooms begin to glow with lamplight. The house softens visually, which is one of its tricks. Flame warms the edges of polished wood, curtains turn golden, distant voices blur. It almost looks peaceful enough to belong in a sentimental painting, but the woman carrying the basin or scrubbing the pot or folding the napkins knows exactly how much force stands behind that glow. When at last the immediate tasks ease, your body carries the record of the day. Smoke in your hair, soap on your wrists, heat in your face, needle marks in your fingertips, the smell of starch and grease and lamp oil clinging to cloth. The big house has demanded quiet hands, swift steps, and careful eyes. It has asked for service polish to look effortless. It has taken skill and called it duty, taken endurance and called it natural. You step out into the evening air, and it feels different from the air inside, less perfumed, more honest. Crickets begin in the grass. Smoke rises from cooking fires in the distance. The sky holds the last pale light over the Mississippi land. Behind you, the house stands bright and composed, pretending its order grew out of itself. In your muscles, in your hands, in the ache behind your eyes, you know exactly how that order was made. Evening on a Mississippi plantation does not arrive with comfort laid out neatly for you. It arrives with needs, hunger, soreness, damp clothing, children wanting food, shoes wearing thin at the edges, a pot that still needs something placed inside it. For black women in 1850, survival was often built from the smallest materials, the things a wealthy household might barely notice. A spoonful saved, a seam repaired, a garment turned and patched one more time. Luxury is not part of this world. Resourcefulness is. Food begins with rations, and rations are rarely generous. On many plantations, enslaved people received weekly or monthly allowances of cornmeal, pork, molasses, and sometimes flour. There might be sweet potatoes, peas, or greens when available. There might also be very little variety for long stretches. The body learns the sameness first through the mouth. Cornmeal again, salt pork again, grease again. The tongue knows before the mind can form the complaint. You hold a handful of meal and think in measurements that live in the fingers, not in spoons. How much for tonight? How much must remain? How much can be stretched if one child wakes hungry again? The smell of cornmeal is dry and faintly sweet. The smell of salt pork is stronger, dense and fatty, with that heavy note of preservation that clings to the air. When meat is scarce, every scrap matters. Fat saved in a jar, bones boiled longer, bits of greens cooked down with a rind so the pot can whisper of richness even when it cannot truly provide it. Cooking in the quarters asks for invention. A woman makes hoe cakes from coarse meal and water, perhaps with a pinch of salt if she has it. She stirs mush in an iron pot while smoke curls up and stings the eyes. She sets sweet potatoes near the coals. She crushes herbs between her fingers and drops them in, changing not only flavour, but mood. Smell matters. A little onion, pepper, or sage can make a hard day feel less stripped of pleasure. In a world of shortage, taste becomes a form of memory. Enslaved women often supplemented rations through gardening, gathering, fishing, trapping, or raising a few chickens when permitted. This part of plantation life mattered a great deal. A patch of collards or beans near the quarters could mean the difference between dull hunger and some measure of nourishment. Wild blackberries, persimmons, poke greens, nuts, and fish from nearby water could widen the narrow menu. Mississippi land offered abundance if you knew where to look, though that abundance came with constant limits imposed by ownership and surveillance. You crouch near a small fire and hear the grease hiss in the pan. Smoke settles in your hair, ash drifts onto your skirt. The heat on your shins is pleasant for a moment, especially if the evening has turned cool. In summer, though, fire feels like one more burden pressing against already overheated skin. Still, people gather around it. Fire gives warmth, light, and a little centre to the space. It makes a room or yard feel briefly held together. Children watch closely while food cooks. Their faces catch the orange glow of the flames. Hunger sharpens the eyes. A mother notices who's trying not to ask for more. She notices who eats too quickly. She notices who has gone quiet. Feeding children under slavery was never just domestic routine. It was strategy, triage, and tenderness mixed together. A woman might take the smaller portion herself without a word. She might chew tougher meat first to soften it for a little one. She might save a crust in her apron for later, because later always comes. Then there is clothing, another daily negotiation between need and scarcity. Plantation-issued garments were usually rough and minimal. Women often wore dresses made of coarse Osnaburg, homespun wool, or low-quality cotton cloth, depending on season and plantation practice. The fabric could scrape the skin at the collar and wrists. Seams split under strain, hems frayed in mud, sleeves tore at the elbow. A dress was not replaced because it looked worn. It was worn because it was not replaced. You run your fingers over cloth that has thinned nearly to transparency at one fold and thickened with patch upon patch at another. Needle and thread become tools of rescue. A tear at the shoulder, a ripped hem, a split waistband, a missing button. These small damages can turn into real problems quickly when work is hard and laundry harsh. Mending often happened at night by weak firelight or lamplight, when eyes were tired and fingers clumsy from the day's labour. Yet the stitches had to hold. Some enslaved women received 1 or 2 dresses a year from the plantation, sometimes with a winter garment, kerchiefs, and shoes. Sometimes the allotment was worse. Children often wore very little in warm weather, especially when young. Shoes could be rationed out seasonally, and many went without proper footwear for long periods. The ground in Mississippi could be soft with mud, hot with dust, cold with winter damp, or cruelly stubbled after harvest. Bare feet learned every version of the land. A curious detail appears in some accounts of slavery women sometimes stiffened. Worn cloth or reshaped old garments so they would look more presentable on Sundays or special occasions, using skill and pride to pull dignity from fabric that was nearly defeated. That is one of the quieter acts of self-making in plantation life. A head wrap tied beautifully. a skirt adjusted to hang better, a faded dress washed carefully until it looked almost fresh in evening light. People do not stop wanting beauty simply because the world has been ugly to them. Textiles also carried hierarchy. How servants might receive cast-off garments from the owner's family, though these were often altered, worn, or unsuitable. Still, a remade dress from finer cloth could mean warmth, softness, or a chance to present oneself differently. Women reused everything. A worn gown might become a child's garment. Scraps became patches. Patches became quilt pieces. A flour sack became a towel. Cloth was not thrown away lightly because cloth itself was labour. The cabin interior reflects this economy of necessity. Bedding might be made from corn shuck mattresses, straw ticks, old blankets, quilts pieced together from scraps, or whatever materials could be managed. Corn shucks rustle and flatten. Straw pricks through thin fabric. A blanket can smell of smoke, skin, damp air, and long use. Yet even these rough materials were arranged with care where possible. A bed made tidily is not trivial. It is one corner of order in a system built on disorder of the soul. Touch tells the truth of scarcity very clearly. Rough wool against the neck, splintered floorboards beneath a heel, a wooden spoon smoothed by years of use, a cracked bowl with one carefully mended side, soap dried hard and sharp-edged in a dish, the thick seam of a patch sleeve rubbing under the arm, a child leaning warm and limp with sleep against your lap while you mend by the fire. Life is felt through texture as much as through thought. The smell of the quarters changes with the season and the hour. At supper time it might be corn cakes, greens, smoke, and sweat. In wet weather it turns earthier, with damp wood, muddy shoes, and wool that never quite dries. In winter there is more smoke and cold air sneaking through wool cracks. In summer the heat brings skin, dust, molasses, and the sweet rot of nearby vegetation. Nothing is neutral. Everything enters the breath. Historians still argue over how adequate plantation rations actually were in daily practice, because owners' records often claimed regular provisions, while testimonies from formerly enslaved people described hunger, poor quality meat, spoiled meal, and uneven distribution. That uncertainty is revealing in itself. The people keeping the books had every reason to make themselves appear efficient and humane. The people eating the food had fewer reasons to flatter anyone. A black woman in the quarters often became a manager of shortage. She tracked what was left without writing it down. She knew which child hated bitter greens but needed them. She knew which neighbour's baby had been sick and might need broth. She knew when to save meal for tomorrow and when a hard day required feeding everyone a little more tonight. This was intelligence, not instinct alone. It required memory, calculation, and discipline under pressure. You might also barter within the limits allowed by plantation life. A handful of beans for a scrap of salt pork, a bit of thread for a pinch of pepper, a patch sewn in exchange for help watching a child. On some plantations, enslaved people sold produce, eggs, baskets, or handwork at small markets or to neighbours, though practices varied widely and owners often controlled or profited from such activity. Where even small trade existed, women were often at its centre. Economy from below looked very different from the ledger books in the big house. Another overlooked detail is the role of cooking vessels themselves. An iron pot, a skillet, a kettle, a gourd dipper, a wooden trencher, a tin cup. These humble objects shaped daily survival. Their absence could create real hardship. Their care mattered. Pots were scrubbed, seasoned, guarded from damage, and used for everything from mush to stew to laundry water. In a world with few possessions, ordinary tools acquired almost personal importance. Then there is Sunday clothing, or what passes for it. Even in scarcity, many enslaved women took care with appearance on worship days or rare visits. They washed garments thoroughly, retied headcloths, borrowed ribbons, and cleaned children as best they could. This was not vanity in any shallow sense. It was social presence. It said you still belonged to yourself in some inward way. A neat dress could not change the law, but it could steady the spirit. The body, however, keeps recording deprivation. Diets heavy in cornmeal and pork could sustain labour at a basic level, but not necessarily support good health. Vitamin deficiencies, digestive problems, worn teeth, and chronic fatigue were common risks. Pregnant and nursing women bore even heavier nutritional strain. A mother might feel her own hunger deepen while trying to nourish a child. Her body became another place where the plantation extracted more than it gave back. Scholars continue to debate how much access enslaved women in Mississippi had to independent food production compared with women in older plantation regions. Since local geography, owner policy, and market conditions could change the picture dramatically. On some places, garden plots were crucial. On others, access was narrow or tightly controlled. Yet wherever women could cultivate, gather, or save food on their own terms, that labour formed a quiet defence against dependence. Night deepens outside the cabin, the last colour drains from the sky, and insects begin their steady chorus in the grass. Supper bowls empty slowly. Children lick fingers or scrape the last bits from wooden dishes. Someone tears cornbread into careful portions. Someone saves a little for dawn. The body softens slightly once food is inside it. Though never fully, hunger can be postponed. It is not always defeated. You look around the cabin and see the material world of survival spread in modest form. A peg with a dress hanging from it, a folded blanket, a chest or box if the family is fortunate enough to have one, a broom propped in the corner, a bundle of herbs tied to dry, shoes left near the door, a gourd on a shelf, a quilt with irregular seams that still holds together. None of it is lavish. All of it matters. There is also the social life of food and clothing. A woman may tease another for patching a sleeve crooked. Someone laughs at a child with molasses on the chin. An elder advises on stretching flour with meal. A younger woman admires a neatly tied head wrap. In such moments, the quarters are not merely a site of deprivation. They are a place of judgment, humour, standards, and taste. People still have opinions, and quite sharp ones. Misery does not erase personality. In fact, it sometimes gives it a sharper edge. One fringe tidbit, preserved in bits of memory and regional custom, is that some women used soot, plant stain, or berry juice in tiny amounts to darken faded cloth, or freshen the look of a worn garment. Whether practical or only occasional, the idea itself tells you something important. Presentation mattered enough for experimentation. The eye wanted relief from drabness. The self wanted expression. As the fire burns lower, mending begins. A child sleeps against one shoulder while your hands work the needle. The thread pulls through cloth with a faint whisper. Eyes strain in the shifting light. Stitch by stitch, the torn thing becomes usable again. Not new, usable. That word carries much of plantation life within it. The owners wanted people usable. Women in the quarters made garments usable, food usable, cabins usable, another day usable. They transformed insufficiency into continuation. A scholarly uncertainty lingers around how often plantation owners deliberately kept clothing and rations at bare minimum levels to maximize profit, versus simply following local custom without much thought. The distinction, from the perspective of the person going hungry or cold, may feel rather academic. Intent does not soften rough cloth. Habit does not fill an empty pot. But the question still matters because it exposes how cruelty can wear both a deliberate face and a lazy one. At last the meal is done, the pot is scraped clean enough to wash, hands smell of smoke, grease, and soap. A patched garment waits folded for morning. Shoes, if there are shoes, sit near the wall with cracked leather curling at the edges. The cabin settles into lower voices and softer movement. Bellies are not full, perhaps, but somewhat steadied. Cloth is not good, but holding. Beds are not soft, but ready. This is what survival often looks like here. Not grand victories, not dramatic speeches, a hot cake divided fairly, a hem repaired before it rips further, greens gathered from a small patch, a blanket tucked around a sleeping child, a scrap saved because tomorrow may ask for it. Black women on Mississippi plantations were forced into poverty by design, yet within that poverty they built systems of care so exact and persistent that life continued where it was never meant to flourish. The fire sinks to red coals. Outside, the plantation grows darker and quieter. Inside, the smell of cornmeal, smoke, and worn cloth lingers in the air. You lower your hands at last, feeling the ache in the fingers and the pull in the back. Around you, the simple objects of the cabin remain where labour has placed them. Bowl, blanket, needle, shoe, pot. Each one plain, each one earned. Night does not quiet a mother's mind on a Mississippi plantation in 1850. It only changes what the worry sounds like. In daylight, fear rides in plain sight with orders, labour and watchful eyes. After dark, it shifts into smaller noises. A child coughing in sleep, a baby rooting weakly against a breast, feet passing outside the cabin, a horse somewhere in the yard, wind pressing at the wall. Each sound asks a question your body answers before your thoughts do. Motherhood under slavery is filled with tenderness, but it is never sheltered tenderness. It is protective, interrupted, exhausted, and alert. You hold a child and feel warmth, breath, softness in the cheek, tiny fingers curling around one of yours. At the same time, you know with terrible clarity that love offers no legal shield here. Your child is not regarded as fully yours by the world around you. That fact sits in every cradle, every lullaby, every morning goodbye. In Mississippi, as across the slaveholding South, the condition of a child followed the condition of the mother. That rule was central to slavery's logic. It meant that an enslaved woman's body was not only a source of labour, but a source of future property in the eyes of owners. The cruelty of that arrangement is hard to overstate. Pregnancy could be watched with interest by people who spoke of babies in the language of increase and value. A mother felt life growing inside her. The plantations saw an asset on the way. The two views could not be more different, though they occupied the same room. You wake before dawn with a child tucked against you. Heavy with sleep and warm from the night, the cabin smells of old smoke, skin, milk, and damp cloth. You adjust your arm so the little head rests better. The child sighs once and settles. There is sweetness here, real sweetness. A mother learns the exact shape of her child's forehead under her lips. She knows the smell of hair after sun and dust. She knows which cry means hunger, which means fear, which means fever. That knowledge is intimate and immediate. No system of ownership can make it less true. Still, slavery crowds every part of motherhood. Women often had to return to labour soon after giving birth, sometimes with barely any time to recover. A nursing mother might carry her soreness into the field, or leave a very young baby in the care of another woman, glancing back until the path bends and the cabin disappears. Milk lets down at the sound of crying. Breasts ache and leak during work. The body keeps trying to mother even when the day's structure tries to separate mother and child. Some plantations created rough arrangements for infant care, with elderly women, disabled workers, or young girls watching groups of children while others laboured. That did not make the setup safe or easy. It made it possible enough for the plantation to continue. Babies lay on quilts in shade when weather allowed. Toddlers wandered under watch that was loving but stretched thin. Older sisters became little mothers before they were old enough to understand the full sadness of that role. You kneel beside a small child and wipe her face with a damp cloth. The skin is warm. The nose runs. Eyes blink sleepily. A mother is always checking forehead, breathing, appetite, stool, rash. The body becomes a map to read for danger. In a world with limited medical care and poor nutrition, childhood illness could turn frightening with terrible speed. Teething fever, worms, diarrhea, coughs, infected scratches, chills in winter, heat sickness in summer. Each one might pass or might not. A mother learned not to trust calm too quickly. Black women on plantations often held deep knowledge of childcare, birthing, and healing. Older women delivered babies, advised younger mothers, soothed labour pains, and shared remedies for colic, cough, fever, and teething. Herbal knowledge mattered immensely. A tea, a poultice, a steam, a rubbed oil, a cooling cloth. Some remedies helped. Some offered comfort more than cure. All were part of a female network of care built under impossible conditions. The quarters could function like an informal school of motherhood, though the lessons were learned under strain. The sensory world of raising children here is intense. Sour milk on a shoulder cloth, soap and lye on tiny shirts, sweet potato mashed into a baby's fist, the smell of warm scalp and wood smoke, bare feet pattering on dirt outside the cabin, small bodies pressed close in sleep during winter, kicking blankets loose in summer, children's laughter rising suddenly from the yard like birds startled into the air. For a few moments, play breaks through everything. And children did play, that fact matters. They chased each other around cabin corners, rolled hoops, sang little songs, made dolls from rags and corn husks, played with sticks, pebbles, feathers, and scraps. They imitated grown-ups with tiny seriousness that could make a woman laugh despite herself. A little girl balanced a broken bowl as if serving supper. A boy marched with a stick horse in great dignity. Childhood was constrained, threatened, and often burdened early, but it still contained imagination. One quirky detail from recollections of enslaved childhood is the care some mothers and older girls put into making rag dolls, cloth animals, or tiny ornaments from scraps. A button might become an eye. Corn silk might serve as hair. Bits of bright cloth, precious and rare, could transform a toy into something cherished. These handmade objects were small acts of devotion. They said, in quiet fabric language, "You're worth making something for." Yet joy lives beside dread. The greatest terror for many enslaved mothers was separation. Sale could tear through a family at any time. A debt, an estate division, a punishment, a relocation, a marriage settlement, a planter's financial trouble, a change of mind. That was enough. Children could be sold away from mothers, mothers from children, siblings from one another. No moral drama was required from the legal system because the legal system itself sanctioned it. Love existed in full knowledge of that threat. You might watch a trader's wagon too long when it appears on the road. You might fall silent if strangers come to inspect the plantation. You might count your children with your eyes again and again, not because you have forgotten the number, but because fear likes repetition. Some women held back from visible attachment in public, or tried to seem composed, because notice itself could feel dangerous. Others clung more fiercely. There was no perfect strategy. The power imbalance was too complete. Historians still debate how often owners deliberately avoided separating mothers and young children out of paternalism, economics, or public image, because records and testimonies offer conflicting pictures. Some owners claimed they kept families together when convenient. Enslaved people remembered separation as a recurring terror and reality. Even where sale did not happen immediately, the possibility shaped behavior and emotion every day. Fear does not require constant action to remain effective. It only requires credibility. Pregnancy itself brought little sanctuary. Enslaved women were expected to continue working through much of it. Some received slightly modified duties late in term, but many did not. The body carried fatigue, nausea, swelling, back pain, and the constant pull of labour under field or domestic demands. A pregnant woman might bend over a wash kettle, climb cabin steps, hoe in heat, or carry water while feeling the child move inside her. Others around her would notice the careful gait, the hand pressed to the small of the back, the pause before lifting. Birth could happen in the cabin, attended by other women, with men kept outside or at a distance. The room would be close with heat and breath, water warming, cloths ready, a whispered prayer, encouragement low and firm. Older women knew when to rub the back, when to change position, when to wait, when to worry. Midwifery among enslaved women was practical, skilled, and deeply respected, even though written medical history often minimized it. These births took place far from comfort, but not far from female competence. There were also losses that scarcely entered records. Miscarriages from overwork, stillbirths, babies who lived only days, children taken by sickness in one hot week, a mother grieving while still expected to cook, wash, or return to the field. Plantation systems did not pause gracefully for mourning. Grief had to be folded into labour. Tears might come at a fire in a field row, or into the corner of a blanket while others slept. Scholars continue to disagree over how much plantation managers manipulated pairings and fertility among the enslaved, because direct evidence is uneven and often filtered through evasive language. What is certain is that owners understood the economic value of births, whether through pressure, calculation, or simple exploitation of already existing family bonds. The reproductive lives of black women were never fully private under slavery. Even the most intimate part of life could be shadowed by someone else's profit. You soothe a child through fever at night, and the cabin seems to shrink around that single task. The world becomes a forehead too hot, a cup of water, a cloth rinsed again, a whispered song, crickets scrape outside, the fire burns low, other bodies sleep nearby or pretend to. Every mother's ear remains partly awake when the child finally sleeps more evenly. Relief runs through you so quickly it almost feels like weakness. The body had been braced for worse. Older children carried special burdens too. Girls might help nurse babies, fetch water, mind younger siblings, and learn domestic work early. Boys might be sent on errands, care for animals, or join lighter field labour. Childhood under slavery often shortened abruptly. A mother watched this happen with mixed feeling: pride in a daughter's competence, pain at the necessity, worry over a son's growing size as he approached the age when punishment might intensify. Time itself could feel dangerous because every year brought the child closer to fuller exploitation. And still, mothers taught. They taught names, kin ties, manners, prayers, songs, warnings, and survival habits. They taught children how to speak carefully around white people, how to listen closely, how not to wander near certain places, how to greet elders, how to hold on to family lines even when official records ignored them. A mother might trace kinship through memory like stitching through cloth. That woman in the next cabin is your auntie. That man on the neighbouring place is your brother's father. That old woman remembers your grandmother. Family under slavery often extended beyond legal recognition, into a wide network held together by memory and insistence. One fringe tidbit from the broader world of slavery is that some mothers braided seeds, tiny keepsakes, or bits of protective material into children's hair, or tucked them into clothing when moving between places, whether for practical use, remembrance, or spiritual protection. Such acts speak to a deep maternal instinct to place something of home or blessing directly on the child's body. You could not control the road. You could still send a token with the child. Discipline within the quarters formed another difficult part of motherhood. A woman had to teach children obedience enough to survive, without crushing their spirit entirely. Do not answer back there. Come when called. Stay near the cabin. Be respectful. Do not run toward the road. Some of these rules came from ordinary parental care. Some came from the terrifying need to keep a child alive under a violent system. A sharp word from a mother might be love wearing armor. The emotional complexity deepens when a woman is required to care for white children. She may know them intimately, sing them to sleep, clean their scraped knees, and calm their bad dreams. Human attachment can form under ugly structures, but this does not erase the imbalance. A black mother could be summoned to soothe an owner's child while her own little one cried elsewhere. That split loyalty was not a natural moral failure. It was an imposed wound. A scholarly question remains about how enslaved mothers described joy in their own terms, because many surviving narratives recorded by others focused heavily on suffering, sale, and labour. Those realities were central, yes. Yet within the same lives there was affection, teasing, pride, delight in milestones, and fierce celebration of children learning to walk, talk, sing, or pray. Historians try to recover those textures without diminishing the brutality that surrounded them. It is a delicate balance, but an important one. Evening in the quarters often gathered mothers and children into a temporary circle of sound. Bowls scraped, babies fussed, girls whispered, boys laughed too loudly until corrected. Someone sang low while braiding hair. A child asked for a story. Another begged not to sleep yet. Stories mattered. Animal tales, Bible scenes, family memories, cautionary stories, bits of humour. Through them, Mothers could pass along values, wit and coded warnings while giving children a little softness before sleep. You lie beside a child at the end of the day and feel the tiny heartbeat where a head rests on your arm. Outside, the air smells of cooling earth and smoke. Inside, the cabin is close and dim. You smooth hair away from a damp forehead. The child sleeps, trusting you completely. That trust is beautiful and almost unbearable. You want to promise safety. The world has not given you that promise to offer. What you can offer is presence, skill, vigilance, warmth, food divided as fairly as possible, names remembered, songs repeated, and love so steady it becomes its own kind of shelter. This is what motherhood looks like here. Not sentiment framed in lace, but endurance with a cradle in its arms. Not idealized domestic peace, but tenderness practiced in the middle of danger. A black woman on a Mississippi plantation in 1850 mothers with one eye on the child and one eye on the road, the ledger, the illness, the season, the owner's mood, the next dawn. She cannot make the world safe. She can make herself a wall between the child and the world whenever she's able. The night deepens. Breath slows around the room. A baby stirs and settles again. Somewhere beyond the cabin, a horse snorts in the dark. The stars hang over the plantation with indifferent brightness. Beneath them, in a small rough room built by force, a mother holds her child and keeps watch with the oldest tools she has. Her hands, her memory, her voice, her love. When the work of the day loosens its grip and the plantation settles into evening, another life begins to show itself in the cabins and paths between them. It is quieter than the public life of labour, but no less important. This is where bonds are made, tested, repaired, and remembered. For black women on Mississippi, plantations in 1850, family was often larger than a single cabin and more fragile than anyone should have to bear. Yet it was also the place where identity could still be spoken aloud by people who truly knew your name. Kinship under slavery did not fit neatly into the legal shapes preferred by white society. The law recognized ownership more readily than it recognized black family life. A husband and wife might live on the same plantation or on neighbouring ones, or miles apart. Children might be raised by mothers, grandmothers, aunts, older sisters, unrelated elders, or all of them together in shifting combinations. Family was built through blood, marriage, affection, necessity, and shared danger. It had to be flexible because slavery kept trying to break it. You step out into the yard at dusk and hear voices drifting between cabins. A pot lid clinks. Somebody laughs low and sudden. Crickets start up in the grass. Smoke from several fires mingles in the warm air, carrying the smell of cornmeal, greens, and damp wood. Women move between doorways with bowls, babies, bundles, and bits of news. A child runs past barefoot, chased by an older girl with all the weary authority of a second mother. No one in the yard needs a lecture on responsibility. Everyone already has too much of it. Marriage among enslaved people existed in a painful contradiction. It could be deeply meaningful and socially recognized within the community. But legally it was insecure because enslaved people were property, not citizens with protected family rights. A woman might choose a partner, court, marry in a ceremony, or simply begin living in acknowledged union. She might also have that bond threatened at any moment by sale, distance, or an owner's refusal. Love existed, but it had no legal roof over its head. Courtship itself still happened, because human beings continue to seek one another even in hard places. A man might visit from another plantation on a Saturday night or Sunday if allowed. This practice became known in some places as walking out or abroad marriage. Though regional patterns varied, imagine the effort. After a week of labour, a man walks miles in dust or mud to see the woman he loves for a few hours before walking back before dawn or first light. Not exactly an effortless dating scene. Romantic? Yes. Also exhausting. A woman waiting for such a visit knows the path by sound before she fully sees him. Footsteps, a cough, the murmur of a greeting at the edge of the yard. Her dress may be the same rough dress worn all week, but she has washed it carefully, A head wrap is tied with extra care. Hair is smoothed. Someone teases her. Someone else pretends not to notice. Even under slavery, people still blush. That fact is oddly comforting. These visits mattered beyond romance. They reaffirmed family lines. They carried news from other plantations. They created wider networks of loyalty and information. A husband coming from another place might bring word of a cousin sold away, a birth, a death, a rumour of sale, a cruel overseer, a new preacher, a steamboat accident, or a storm that flattened crops upriver. The roads between plantations carried emotion and intelligence together. Women often stood at the centre of these relationship webs. They tracked kinship with remarkable precision. Who was related to whom? Which child resembled which grandmother? Which aunt lived 2 plantations over? Which cousin had been sold south? Which man belonged to a neighbouring place but came every Sunday to see his wife and children? This knowledge was not just sentimental. It preserved identity in a system that tried to reduce people to units. You hear names spoken in the dark with a tenderness that does not appear in plantation inventories. Pet names, praise names, childhood names, names of the dead kept alive by repetition. One of the cruelest habits of slavery was the casual renaming of black people by owners. Yet within the quarters, people often maintained fuller naming traditions, nicknames, kin titles, and personal references that restored something of the self. To be called Mama Rose, Aunt Liza, or Big Sarah could carry status, memory, and affection that no ledger could erase. A grandmother in the cabin corner can hold enormous authority. She may no longer be able to work at the same pace in the field, but her value in the community is immense. She watches children, remembers births, settles quarrels, identifies kin, advises the young, and carries oral history. Her hands may be twisted with age, her back bent, her voice rough from smoke and time. People still listen when she speaks. In many enslaved communities, older women form the backbone of continuity. There is also the informal kinship that blooms when blood relatives are absent. A woman calls another sister because they have survived too much together not to mean it. An elder becomes auntie because she has earned the role through care, correction, and constancy. Children learn to move among these bonds naturally. The community of the quarters often functioned as an extended family, precisely because legal family security could not be trusted. Historians still argue over how closely enslaved marriages resembled formal Christian unions in daily practice, because customs varied widely, and many relationships drew from both African American tradition and available religious forms. Some couples jumped a broom, some exchanged vows before a preacher, some simply began living as husband and wife with community recognition. The ceremony mattered, but often the deeper truth was the communal acknowledgement. People knew who belonged to whom in love, duty, and hope. Evening brings moments for those bonds to breathe. Women sit near doorways shelling peas, combing a child's hair, or mending cloth while talking in low voices. These conversations are textured with gossip, sympathy, teasing, and warning. One woman asks whether another's husband made it over last Sunday. Another rolls her eyes and says he talks too much and brings nothing but stories. Everyone laughs. Affection does not remove the right to complain. In fact, it usually sharpens it. Humour played an important role in relationships. Plantation life was full of grief and strain, but wit survived beautifully. Gentle mockery, flirtation, exaggerated complaint, stories about somebody's foolish hat or somebody else's proud strut across the yard. People still had styles of personality. The vain man, the soft-hearted girl, the stern grandmother, the dreamy young mother, the woman who always knew the latest news, the one who claimed not to care and obviously cared very much. Community is made of types as well as love. Some enslaved women were also forced into relationships or exposed to sexual coercion by owners, overseers, or other white men. That grim reality shaped the social life of the quarters too. It could complicate courtship, strain marriages, create pain around children, and produce forms of grief or anger that had no safe public outlet. Any honest picture of kinship under slavery must make room for this violation, without allowing it to define every bond completely. Love existed. So did coercion. They often collided in the same world. A small but memorable tidbit from recollections of enslaved life is that some courting couples carved initials into trees, exchanged ribbons, gave each other polished stones, or saved tiny keepsakes as tokens. Such objects were simple, sometimes almost laughably modest by wealthy standards, yet deeply meaningful. A blue bead, a ribbon end, a shell from the riverbank, a feather tucked into a hand. When property laws deny you nearly everything, small gifts gain extraordinary force. The atmosphere of these evenings can be surprisingly rich. Frogs call from wetter ground, cicadas pulse in the trees, fireflies appear over the grass like wandering sparks. The air smells of cooling earth, smoke, and the last of supper. Skin loosens in the slight relief after heat. A baby fusses, then quiets. Someone hums. In this light, a woman's face softens from the hard set it carried through labour. Tiredness remains. Of course, so does beauty. Children move through this web of kin and near-kin constantly. They are corrected by many hands, fed from many bowls, and claimed by more than one heart. A child who loses a mother, or whose mother is sent elsewhere, may still be gathered in by grandmothers, aunts, unrelated women, and older girls. The community cannot erase the loss, but it can resist complete abandonment. In a system designed to fracture people, this collective care was a form of stubborn repair. Men's roles in family life were also important, though often distorted by slavery's pressures. Fathers, husbands, brothers, and grandfathers provided affection, protection when possible, labour, stories, discipline, and identity. Yet their ability to reside with family consistently or exercise authority was constantly undercut by the slave system. Black women often had to hold the visible centre of domestic life, because the system so often displaced men physically or socially. This was not a sign of male irrelevance. It was evidence of a world arranged to weaken black family stability. Scholars continue to debate how much African kinship tradition survived directly in Mississippi plantation communities by 1850, since generations of forced migration, sale, and adaptation had transformed family structures over time. Still, many researchers point to enduring patterns of extended kin care, elder authority, naming practices, and communal child rearing that suggest continuity as well as change. The precise line cannot always be drawn. The living patterns, however, are hard to miss. In some quarters, Saturday night or Sunday evening offered a little more room for visiting, singing, or social gathering. Women might sit together plaiting hair, rubbing sore feet, or discussing marriages and births. A young woman could receive advice both practical and emotional. How to judge a man's steadiness, how to keep peace with his kin, how to survive if he is sold, how to protect your children. This was not sentimental bridal guidance with white lace and cake. It was sturdier than that. It had to be. Jealousy and quarrels existed too. Of course they did. People argued over partners, over children, over borrowed items not returned, over insults, over favouritism, over gossip that travelled farther than it should. A small community under pressure does not become saintly. It becomes intensely human. Yet even conflict revealed social investment. People cared enough to take offence. They expected standards from one another. There was a moral life in the quarters, though not one written by lawmakers. You may see a woman pause near another cabin before entering, carrying a bowl of broth to someone with a sick child. Another lends thread. Another watches 2 extra children while a neighbour goes to visit a husband on a nearby place. One woman braids another's hair. One settles a quarrel between girls. One quietly passes along news too painful to say loudly. These are the unnoticed acts that turn a settlement into a community, and communities created ceremonies where they could weddings, naming moments, prayer meetings, burial gatherings, informal suppers, courting visits, holiday dances, Sunday clothes, shared songs. Even when stripped down by surveillance and shortage, these rituals still marked life as more than labour. A marriage might be blessed by an elder beneath the trees. A couple might step over a broom while neighbours smile and children stare solemnly. The broom ceremony itself has a debated history, with scholars still discussing how much it drew from African traditions, British folk custom, or local adaptation. What matters most in the moment is simpler. Two people are claiming each other before witnesses. A woman's social standing in the quarters could come from many things: her age, her labour skill, her healing knowledge, her piety, her wit, her steadiness, her success in raising children, her ability to keep a cabin orderly, her generosity, her beauty too, certainly. Though beauty under slavery could bring danger as well as admiration. Respect was not evenly distributed. It was negotiated, observed, and remembered in countless small interactions. One fringe detail noted in some oral traditions is the use of doorsteps sitting as a social practice with subtle meaning. Who sat where, who joined whom, who lingered near which cabin, who crossed the yard after dark, all could signal friendship, courtship, tension, or alliance. A plantation yard at evening was almost like a map of feeling, not written, but visible to anyone who knew how to read it. The emotional strain of possible sale touched every relationship. A husband might be kept on another plantation, a daughter might be noticed by a trader, his son might be hired out, an old mother might fear dying away from her children. This uncertainty gave urgency to ordinary affection, a shared meal, a held hand, a Sunday visit, a joke told twice, a baby's name repeated to a grandparent. Nothing could be taken for granted for long, yet love persisted in forms both soft and disciplined. A woman might scold her daughter sharply for wandering too far, then smooth her hair minutes later. A husband might bring no gift but his presence and be welcomed like abundance. A grandmother might pretend annoyance while saving the sweetest bite for a child. A group of women might sit together in companionable silence after a long day, too tired for much speech, their closeness itself doing the work of comfort. A scholarly uncertainty remains around how enslaved women themselves define successful family life, because surviving written accounts often filter their experiences through abolitionist, interviewer, or owner perspectives. But if you look at behaviour rather than formal declarations, a picture emerges. Success meant keeping people connected when separation threatened. It meant remembering who belonged to whom. It meant carrying stories, names, and obligations across time. It meant making kinship larger than the documents allowed. The stars come out above the quarters. Somewhere a fiddle may sound from a distant cabin or a neighbour's place, thin and lively in the warm dark. Somewhere else a couple speaks quietly near the path, their words too soft to catch. A baby sleeps against an elder's shoulder. Women finish the last of the day's talk while sweeping a doorstep or banked coals for the night. The air has cooled enough to ease the skin. Smoke drifts flat now. Fireflies wink on and off along the fence line. In this hush, the plantation's official order loses some of its hold. Not all of it. Never all. But enough for another truth to become visible. Black women here are not only labourers, cooks, mothers, field hands, or maids. They are wives, daughters, sisters, grandmothers, beloveds, advisors, gossips, peacekeepers, matchmakers, mourners, and memory keepers. They hold together threads that law and commerce keep trying to cut, and that holding together is not sentimental. It is skilled. It requires patience, humour, restraint, memory, generosity, and a kind of courage that seldom announces itself. A woman folds a child into bed, another waits for footsteps from the road, another speaks the names of absent kin softly into the dark as if laying them down where they will not be lost. Around them, the cabins breathe with quiet life. The night insects continue their steady music. The yard, plain by daylight, becomes a place of bonds held carefully in the open air. When night settles fully over a Mississippi plantation, the darkness does not erase suffering, but it changes the texture of it. The fields disappear into shadow. The big house glows at a distance like a world pretending to be calm. In the quarters, quieter powers begin to rise. Voices lower. Firelight softens faces. The air cools against tired skin. It is here, in these hours outside the plantation's official rhythm, that faith, healing, and inner strength gather themselves in forms both visible and hidden. For black women in 1850, spiritual life was not an ornament added to hardship. It was woven through daily endurance. Prayer could begin while lifting a water bucket, while stirring mush, while walking to the field, while pressing a palm to a child's fevered head. It did not require a chapel. Though some plantations forced attendance at controlled religious meetings, it did not require permission, though white people often tried to supervise what enslaved people believed and how they expressed it. Faith lived wherever a woman could carry it, which was nearly everywhere. You sit near a low fire and hear someone begin a prayer so softly it almost blends with the crackle of coals. The words are simple. Lord, keep us. Lord, see us. Lord, bring us through. The power lies not in fancy language but in repetition, breath, and belief. Around the room, heads lower. A child leans into a mother's side. An elder closes her eyes. Even those too tired to speak may listen with a kind of bodily attention, as if the prayer is a blanket being pulled over everyone at once. Christianity had spread widely among enslaved people by the middle of the 19th century. But black religious life in the plantation South was never merely a copy of white plantation religion. It was shaped by reinterpretation, memory, emotional depth, and communal need. Biblical stories of bondage, deliverance, judgment, and divine care held obvious force. Moses mattered. Daniel mattered. The sorrow songs mattered. But so did rhythms of call and response, bodily expression, and forms of collective worship that many scholars connect to African continuities as well as new American experience. A woman may know scripture by hearing rather than reading. She stores verses in memory the way she stores recipes, warnings, or kin names. One line returns when her child is sick, another when the overseer grows cruel, another when thunder rolls over the fields and fear moves through the quarters. Religion here is not abstract theology debated over polished tables. It is spoken into pain, hunger, fatigue, and uncertainty. Some owners encouraged a version of Christianity that emphasized obedience, humility, and heavenly reward. They preferred sermons about servants honoring masters and suffering patiently. Convenient, of course, very tidy for them. Yet enslaved women and men often heard something else in the Bible as well. They heard that the lowly were seen by God. They heard that tyrants could fall. They heard that sorrow had witnesses beyond the plantation fence. That spiritual reading could not be entirely controlled. Prayer meetings among enslaved people took different forms. Some occurred openly under limited supervision. Others were more private, held in cabins, yards, or secluded places in the woods. The so-called hush arbor, a hidden meeting spot screened by brush or trees, has become one of the best remembered images of secret worship in slavery. Whether every plantation had such gatherings is uncertain, but the tradition survives strongly in memory. Imagine the scene. Night air thick with leaves, feet pressing softly over ground, low voices gathering under branches, a quilt or pot laid down to muffle sound, faith moving carefully through danger. You hear singing begin with one woman and then spread, not loud at first, a line offered, then answered. Spirituals carried many functions. They expressed grief, hope, warning, longing, endurance, and sometimes coded meaning. The human voice in the dark can feel larger than the body that produces it. It fills the cabin walls, it slips through door cracks, it rises into the pine-scented night. A slow song can soothe children to sleep. A stronger one can steady adults who feel themselves close to breaking. The sensory world of black spiritual life on the plantation is vivid. Pine smoke in the nose, bare feet on packed earth, a hand clasped tightly in another hand during prayer, sweat cooling on the neck after a long day while song warms the chest from within. The soft thud of someone keeping time with a heel, the rustle of skirts as bodies sway gently. Tears not hidden because darkness and community make hiding less necessary. Women often played central roles in these spiritual spaces. They led prayers, started songs, interpreted dreams, offered counsel, and carried moral authority within the quarters. A woman known for faith could become a point of refuge for others, someone people sought out after bad news, sickness, conflict, or death. Her strength did not have to be loud. It might appear in the way she spoke calmly during panic, or the way children quieted when she began to sing. Faith and healing were closely connected. Enslaved women frequently served as healers within their communities, drawing on herbal knowledge, practical observation, and inherited remedies. A woman might know what leaves to steep for fever, what root to chew for nausea, what poultice to place on an infected wound, what bark might ease pain, what steam could loosen a chest clogged with sickness. This knowledge mattered because formal medical care was inconsistent, often brutal, and primarily concerned with returning labourers to usefulness rather than restoring whole persons to health. You watch an older woman crush leaves in a wooden bowl with deliberate, patient force. The scent rises sharp and green into the warm cabin air. She mixes the paste with fat or water and spreads it onto cloth. Nearby, a child whimpers, a mother hovers anxiously. The healer does not rush. Her calm is part of the treatment. She places the cloth, checks the child's breathing, murmurs a prayer, and gives instructions for the night. In such moments, skill and faith meet naturally. No one in the room sees a strict line between them. A curious tidbit preserved in plantation-era recollections is that some enslaved communities distinguished between ordinary healing knowledge and the more mysterious gifts of certain women who were thought to possess unusual spiritual insight. They might be consulted about troubling dreams, unexplained illness, bad luck, missing items, or strained relationships. White observers often dismiss such practices as superstition. That says more about white arrogance than about black intelligence. Human beings in every society create systems for managing the unknown. Mississippi's landscape offered many materials for healing if you knew how to read it. Sassafras, willow, mint, horehound, mullein, boneset, red pepper, onion, garlic, and many local roots or barks could become part of everyday treatment. Some remedies were effective by modern standards. Others helped a little or worked mainly through comfort and ritual. Still, comfort is not nothing. A sick child soothed by warm tea, a rubbed back, a whispered prayer, and a confident elder has already received something important, even before the fever breaks. Historians still debate the exact degree to which West and Central African spiritual traditions survived in Mississippi plantation religion. By 1850, because direct evidence is fragmentary and often filtered through hostile observers, yet many scholars point to patterns of song, movement, healing, cosmology, and communal ritual that suggest layered continuities rather than complete erasure. The line cannot always be traced neatly. Cultural survival rarely leaves tidy paperwork behind. Dreams carried weight too. A woman might wake unsettled by a vision of water, birds, teeth, roads, or departed kin. She might tell an elder, who listened seriously rather than dismissing it. Dreams could become warnings, comfort, or simply emotional truth given symbolic shape. In a life where control was so limited by day, the night mind retained a special authority. It could reveal what fear already knew, or what hope still dared imagine. Inner strength on a plantation was not always dramatic. More often, it appeared as steadiness. A woman rises after little sleep and still braids a child's hair neatly. She receives cruel words and does not let them poison her speech to others. She buries grief deep enough to finish the day's tasks, then allows herself to sing at night. She gives away part of her own remedy to a neighbour's child. She listens. She remembers. She continues. Strength here is made of repetition and moral discipline, not public triumph. Some women also interpreted signs in the natural world with seriousness. The call of an owl, the pattern of a storm, the sudden silence of birds, the way dogs barked at night, the behaviour of snakes, the timing of certain blooms. Such observations could be practical, spiritual, or both. Rural life trains attention. Plantation life intensifies it. When danger can come from weather, sickness, or human intent, the environment becomes readable in dozens of subtle ways. One fringe detail from folklore associated with the enslaved South involves the use of broom placement, door protections, or buried objects for spiritual defense. Accounts vary widely, and historians rightly treat them with caution, but they reveal a world in which many black women used ritual gestures to mark thresholds and protect family spaces. Whether the method was deeply inherited, locally adapted, or simply a household habit, the impulse is easy to understand. If the world keeps entering your life with harm, you begin to bless the doorway. Sorrow and faith often met most intensely around death. Enslaved people experienced death not only through illness and age, but through overwork, inadequate care, violence, and displacement. Women frequently prepared the body, comforted mourners, and led the emotional work of burial gatherings. The smell of washed cloth, pine boards, damp soil, and candles could cling to memory for years. Songs at such times were both lament and instruction, teaching the living how to bear what had happened. The burial itself might be simple, but the emotional meaning was large. A community gathered, names were spoken, tears came freely or in silence. A woman might hold a child close during the prayer, imprinting memory and continuity at once. Death under slavery threatened not just one life, but the threads of a family network. Faith provided language for that rupture. It said the dead were seen, remembered, received. Without such beliefs, grief might have become unbearable more often than it already was. Scholars continue to disagree about how much plantation owners understood or feared the independent spiritual authority of enslaved women. Some tolerated prayer so long as it reinforced order. Others suspected that unsupervised gatherings encouraged resistance. Both views may have been true depending on the plantation, because black spiritual life did both. It comforted the suffering and quietly undermined the total claims of slavery by insisting that a higher authority existed. To tell yourself that the master is not the final power is already a profound mental act. You can feel this in the singing. One woman closes her eyes and lets her voice rise full now, no longer only a murmur. Another joins. Soon the cabin is filled with layered sound, gentle but firm. The melody rocks. A child falls asleep against a shoulder while the adults continue. The floor is hard. The walls are rough. The air smells of smoke and medicinal herbs. Still, something in the room lifts. Not escape exactly, more like enlargement. The soul finds a little more space than the plantation intended. Healers and spiritually respected women could also become informal counselors. A young wife troubled by a distant husband, a mother frightened by a feverish child, a girl anxious about being noticed by someone dangerous, a man crushed by the threat of sale. People sought those who could listen without flinching. Advice might come in plain words, a proverb, a prayer, a remedy, or a story from long ago. Wisdom in such settings was practical and compassionate, rarely ornamental. There is also the matter of rest, though true rest was scarce. A woman might sit outside her cabin under the stars for a few extra minutes because the night breeze on her face feels like medicine. She might wash her feet in cool water and sigh from the deepest part of herself. She might hum to no one in particular while rubbing sore joints with grease or herb oil. These small acts of bodily care belong to the larger world of healing too. Survival requires maintenance. A scholarly uncertainty remains around how much specific healing knowledge was preserved across generations versus reinvented locally from new environments and necessity. Mississippi's plant world was not identical to African homelands, or even to older plantation regions farther east. Yet enslaved women adapted remarkably, testing, sharing, and refining remedies over time. The result was a living medical culture built from memory, observation, and need. Some women carried special reputations for fixing things beyond sickness. A troubled baby, a household crossed by bad feeling, a marriage in distress, a person who could not sleep for grief. Modern categories would separate medicine, religion, and psychology rather sharply. Plantation life did not always do that. Relief might come through tea, prayer, touch, story, and communal attention at once. To modern eyes that can look untidy, to exhausted human beings, it can look like care. The night around the quarters deepens into a thick blue black. Frogs sound from low wet ground. Fireflies drift above the weeds like tiny wandering lanterns. The stars appear hard and brilliant where the sky opens between trees. A woman steps out of the cabin with a basin, empties it, and pauses for a moment with her face turned upward. In the stillness, the world seems bigger than the plantation again. Not kinder, necessarily. Bigger. That sense of scale matters. Slavery worked by shrinking life, narrowing options, confining movement, and insisting that power was close, total, and unavoidable. Faith pushed back by widening the frame. There was a God larger than the owner's will. There were ancestors remembered. There was meaning beyond cotton, beyond punishment, beyond the day's measured output. Inner strength grew partly from this expanded horizon. A woman could endure the next dawn differently if she believed the world was not finally defined by the plantation. And so the evening closes around prayer, song, herbs, breath, and weary but unbroken company. A child sleeps easier after a remedy. A grieving mother has been held through tears. An elder has spoken words that settle into the room like warm cloth. The fire burns low, voices soften. The smell of crushed leaves mingles with smoke and night air. In the dimness, black women on this Mississippi plantation hold one another up with knowledge both earthly and sacred. No ledger records this labour properly. No planter's journal can quite capture it. Yet it is real and essential. Women heal bodies. They steady minds. They carry belief. They interpret sorrow. They gather fragments of dignity from the floor of each hard day and make something sustaining from them. Their faith is not decorative. Their healing is not accidental. Their inner strength is not a romantic myth. It is practiced, shared, and renewed in the dark, where the plantation's control reaches far but not far enough. Control on a Mississippi plantation in 1850 does not depend on punishment alone, though punishment is always close enough to feel. It depends on repetition, humiliation, uncertainty, and the careful shaping of fear into something ordinary. That is the truly chilling part. Violence can become part of the weather of life here, not because it is natural, but because the system works constantly to make it seem unavoidable. For black women, this pressure is not only physical, it reaches into posture, speech, movement, clothing, family life, and even the expression on the face. You wake with the day's caution already inside your muscles. Before a word is spoken, the body is remembering. Do not move too slowly in sight of certain people. Do not let irritation show on the mouth. Do not ask a question in the wrong tone. Do not linger where you might be accused of idleness. Do not appear too cheerful if someone powerful is in a sour mood. Do not appear too unhappy either, because that can be called sulking. A plantation trains people in impossible balance. Punishment takes many forms. Whipping remains one of the most notorious and widely documented methods in slavery, used against women as well as men. Some owners preferred to claim that women were punished less harshly, but testimonies from formerly enslaved people make clear that black women could be beaten, tied up, slapped, kicked, or otherwise abused for real or invented offences. The offence might be working too slowly, speaking back, breaking an object, failing a quota, leaving a passless path, protecting a child, or simply being available to a cruel temper at the wrong moment. The fear of punishment begins long before the act itself. You hear an overseer's horse on the road and the stomach tightens. You see a mistress holding a torn dress shirt and know someone will pay for it. You hear your name called from across the yard and instantly run through possibilities. What happened? Who noticed? Which child wandered? Which pot burned? Which rumour travelled? Fear in this world is often anticipatory. It lives in the moment before the blow, before the accusation, before the order that turns the whole day sideways. The sounds of authority become distinct over time. Boot heels on a porch, spurs brushing against one another, a riding crop tapping against a leg, the creak of leather, the jangle of keys. White voices carried in a certain register that means command rather than conversation. Even silence can acquire a tone. A woman learns to read these auditory signals with painful precision. Survival depends on it. For black women, control also works through the management of the body as spectacle. A woman may be inspected for labour value, fertility, cleanliness, obedience, and physical condition with no privacy and no dignity. She may be judged in the yard, the field, the kitchen, Or the house with the casual entitlement of people who believe their right to examine another human being is self-evident. A look can feel like a hand. A comment can feel like a public stripping. Sexual vulnerability forms one of the deepest layers of fear. Enslaved women on Mississippi plantations faced the threat of coercion and assault from owners, overseers, sons of the household, traders, and other white men who operated within a legal system that offered black women almost no protection. This was not a side issue. It was built into the structure of power. A woman could be targeted precisely because her refusal carried so little recognized weight in the eyes of the law. That danger changed behavior. It shaped where a woman stood, how she answered, when she avoided certain paths, how she interpreted a summons, what she warned younger girls about, and which older women she stayed near when possible. The body learned to scan for signs, a drunken gait, a lingering glance, a false softness in a voice, a message that you're wanted at the house after dark. Fear here is not abstract dread. It is highly specific and terribly informed. Some humiliations were small enough to escape formal record and large enough to scar a life. Being made to stand while others eat, being mocked for speech, clothing, hair, or accent, being scolded in front of children, being forced to thank someone for cast-off garments, having private grief treated as inconvenience, being ordered to smile for guests, being corrected with false sweetness that only sharpens the insult. Plantation control delights in pettiness because pettiness can be repeated all day. You carry water to the house and hear laughter from the porch. Not with you, about you perhaps, or about someone else equally trapped. It almost does not matter. The laughter lands the same way. A woman in servitude often has to stand still while other people exercise wit at her expense and call it household liveliness. The requirement to absorb insult without response is itself a punishment, one that leaves no visible mark while wearing down the spirit steadily. Historians still debate how much day-to-day plantation discipline depended on the individual temperament of owners and overseers versus broader structural norms, because accounts vary dramatically in detail. Some estates were remembered as exceptionally brutal, others as comparatively restrained in open violence. Yet even on plantations that claimed moderation, the power to punish remained total enough to shape behavior at every level. Terror did not need to be constant in order to be effective. It only needed to be credible. Children learned this early. A little girl sees her mother's face go still when the mistress calls. A boy hears the shift in adult voices when an overseer approaches. A toddler is hushed more sharply near the big house than near the cabins. Fear becomes part of family education. Do not run there. Do not touch that. Speak softly. Keep back. Children may not understand the legal architecture of slavery, but they understand tone with painful speed. Punishment could also be economic and social. Rations reduced, extra tasks assigned, night work added, visiting restricted, a husband denied permission to come, a mother kept from seeing a child during the day, a favoured role taken away, a woman threatened with sale. These punishments were especially cruel because they used relationships and bodily need as instruments of control. The system knew where people were most vulnerable and pressed there deliberately. One curious detail preserved in some plantation recollections is the special anxiety caused by being called to the house, unexpectedly. The phrase itself could carry many meanings: an extra task, a complaint, a summons from the mistress, news of sickness, a punishment, a demand from someone dangerous. The walk from cabin or yard to house steps could become its own chamber of dread. Few words were needed. The imagination did the rest. A black woman might also face punishment for things she did not do, especially if blame needed a convenient place to land. A missing spoon, a broken pitcher, a child of the household with a bruise from ordinary play, laundry not properly whitened, food too salty, a button gone. Plantations are full of people with power over outcomes and no appetite for responsibility. Someone lower down usually absorbs the consequences, and then there is public punishment, which serves not only to hurt one person, but to instruct everyone watching. A woman whipped in sight of others, or tied to a post, or shamed before the quarters, becomes a warning turned into theatre. Children may be pulled away or made to witness. Adults are expected to continue afterward, carrying the image into the next task. Public punishment does not end with the last stroke. It lingers in the yard, in the conversations that night, in the sudden quiet around certain names. The atmosphere surrounding punishment is thick with sensation. Dust kicked up by hurried feet, the sharp smell of sweat and leather, heat pressing down on a crowd forced to stand and watch. The silence afterward, strangely loud once the immediate noise stops. A woman may feel her own skin prickle, though no blow touched her body that day. Fear travels by sight and sound as much as by direct injury. Black women also face the threat of sale as a disciplinary weapon. The words alone could devastate. "I'll sell you." Sometimes it was bluff, sometimes not. The power of the threat came from its plausibility. A mother could imagine children left behind. A wife could imagine being sent farther south or deeper into the cotton districts. Even if the sale never happened, the possibility worked like acid through trust and sleep. It was punishment by horizon, by turning the future itself into a threat. A scholarly uncertainty remains around how often owners use the language of family protection to justify discipline of women, claiming they punished them for their own good, for the children's good, or for plantation order. Such paternal language appears often in white records. It is hard to read without bitterness. The same people who spoke of guidance also held the power to whip, sell, exploit, and separate. Their self-presentation tells you more about their conscience than about their conduct. How servants lived with a distinct kind of fear. Their punishment might be less visible in the field, but more intimate in the household. Slaps, hair-pulling, pinching, forced standing, being shaken awake for night tasks, verbal degradation, threats whispered in private rooms. A mistress could turn the domestic interior into a theatre of constant correction. An owner could exploit proximity. Every room became a possible site of command. Field women faced other intensities. Pace was watched. Bodies were exposed to weather and inspection. Quotas created a permanent basis for accusation. Falling behind, pausing too long, straightening up too often, tending to a child at the field edge, or appearing exhausted in the wrong moment could all invite retaliation. There is something especially cruel about punishing a tired body for showing that it is tired. Plantations excelled at that sort of cruelty. Older women often carried scars, visible or hidden, a line across the back, a stiffened shoulder, a damaged hand, teeth lost from blows or years of poor diet, a habitual flinch when someone moves too quickly nearby. Younger women studied these signs, sometimes silently. The body of an elder could become a record of what power had done over decades. It could also become a warning, a lesson, and a source of grim authority. Yet fear did not erase judgment. Women assessed white behavior constantly. They knew who was violent, who was vain, who liked obedience performed prettily, who was dangerous when drinking, who preferred humiliation to blows, who could be delayed with flattery, who should never be approached alone, who liked to be begged, who enjoyed making people wait. This was unwanted expertise, but expertise all the same. Reading power accurately could save pain. One fringe tidbit from recollected plantation life is that some people could identify a particular overseer by the rhythm of his horse before he came into view. That level of recognition sounds almost unreal until you remember how much depended on anticipation. When fear is part of the environment, the ear becomes very well trained indeed. Punishment also entered the emotional life of the quarters in quieter ways. A mother may become sharper with a child after being shamed all day. A couple may quarrel because one person has been threatened. A woman may sit silent by the fire, unable to explain what happened in the house without reopening the wound. Trauma does not remain neatly where it was inflicted. It spills into speech, sleep, appetite, and affection. The quarters had to absorb these aftershocks night after night. Still, women worked to protect one another where they could. An older woman might step closer when a younger one is called to the house. A neighbour might watch children during a punishment aftermath. Another might bring grease or herbs for wounds. Someone may quietly repeat what was said, helping the victim interpret whether the threat is immediate or theatrical. Fear isolates. but community sometimes pushes back by refusing to let the frightened woman sit alone with it. Historians continue to disagree over how much enslaved women could negotiate or soften punishment through reputation, kin ties, specialized skills, or perceived usefulness. Clearly, such factors sometimes mattered. A valued cook, midwife, or seamstress might receive different treatment than a field hand with no recognized specialty. Yet different rarely meant safe. It only meant that power calculated differently. The structure remained brutal across roles. Humiliation around reproduction and motherhood could be especially vicious. Pregnant women might be accused of laziness. Nursing mothers might be mocked for needing time with babies. Women whose children were sick could be called neglectful if work slipped, though the work itself kept them from caregiving. A system that caused suffering then blamed women for its effects had a particularly poisonous logic. It asked the impossible and punished the failure it had engineered. The weather itself could amplify punishment. A woman forced to stand outside in rain. A girl whipped in summer heat until dizziness overtook her. A field worker driven hard in cold, damp wind. Mississippi's climate pressed against the body already under control, turning discipline into a full sensory assault. Mud clung, the sun burned, mosquitoes bit raw skin, wet cloth chilled. No season offered a humane version of coercion, and still there were moments when the masks slipped from the faces of those in charge, revealing how unstable their power really was. Why so much policing of expression? Why punish a look, a pause, a whisper, a slight slowness, a hidden meeting, a song sung too boldly because domination that feels secure does not need to monitor every eyelid? Plantations enforced obedience obsessively because human beings kept proving, through small deviations, that inner consent was absent. A woman standing in the yard after a day of threats can feel two things at once. Fear, certainly. Also clarity. She knows exactly what sort of world this is, because it has shown itself without poetry. In that knowledge there can be a hardening not of cruelty, but of perception. She sees through the pretenses of benevolent mastery, Christian duty, civilized refinement. She has heard too much, seen too much, endured too much to believe the household's polished lies. A scholarly uncertainty lingers around how often enslaved women spoke openly among themselves about sexual coercion, humiliation, and fear, because such topics were painful and often left only partial traces in historical memory. Silence in the record does not mean silence in life. Women almost certainly found ways to warn, counsel, and mourn together, even when words had to remain guarded. Some knowledge survives only as atmosphere, implication, and protective behaviour. Night closes over the plantation once more. The big house windows dim one by one. In the quarters, low voices move through cabin walls. Someone soothes a child awake from a bad dream. Someone washes a cut hand in a basin. Someone sits very still after a harsh day, staring into coals gone red. The system of punishment has done its work, but not completely. It has bruised bodies, narrowed choices, and seeded fear. It has not reached every inward place. That is the terrible and remarkable truth. Control was vast. Humiliation was daily. Punishment was credible, often immediate, and sometimes savage. Black women in Mississippi plantations lived under a regime designed to regulate not only labor, but spirit. Yet even in the shadow of such pressure, they continued to think, judge, protect, endure, and read the world with unsparing intelligence. Fear walked with them. It didn't become the whole of them. The night air smells of dust, smoke, and cooling pine. Frogs pulse from the low ground. Somewhere beyond the cabins a horse stamps once, then quiets. A woman lifts the latch, steps inside, and closes the door against the dark. It is only a wooden door on rough hinges. It cannot keep the plantation out entirely. But for this moment it marks a boundary, however small, between the public power that punished and the private space where she gathers herself again. Not every act of resistance on a Mississippi plantation looked dramatic enough to make it into legend. In fact, most did not. There were no trumpets, no grand speeches, no perfectly timed thunderclaps from the heavens. Resistance for black women in 1850 was often quieter than that. folded into the ordinary fabric of the day so tightly that it could pass for routine unless you knew where to look. And women knew where to look. They lived inside the smallest margins of power, which meant they also became experts in using them. You rise in the half-dark and tie your headcloth with care, not because anyone has granted you dignity, but because you refuse to greet the day in complete surrender. The knot sits where you choose. The cloth frames your face the way you intend. It is a tiny act, almost laughably small by the standards of political history, yet on a plantation, where so much is chosen for you, small choices carry unusual weight. Resistance can begin in the body. A pause that looks accidental. A face kept calm when someone wants to see fear. A song shaped so that one listener hears obedience and another hears warning. A child guided away from danger without making the movement obvious. A bit of food hidden. A word withheld. A truth passed carefully from mouth to mouth. Under slavery. Survival and resistance often overlap so closely that trying to separate them neatly becomes impossible. Black women on plantations resisted in ways conditioned by gender, labour assignment, and constant surveillance. They could not usually confront power openly without enormous risk. Many still found ways to push back. Some slowed work when possible. Some feigned illness. Some broke tools, damaged cloth, spoiled food, or let a pot boil over at a strategic moment. Some stole time, food, information, or rest. Some protected children from sale or abuse through secrecy and swift planning. Some preserved language, names, songs, rituals, and stories that slavery tried to flatten. All of this mattered. You walk to the field with a basket and a face arranged into the expression most useful for the morning. That expression itself is a skill. It says little. It invites little. It gives no unnecessary opening. A woman learns that not every true thought should live on the face. The body becomes an edited document. Owners and overseers often misread such control as passivity. That misreading could become a small advantage. One of the most common forms of resistance was work slowdowns, not theatrical stoppage. That would be noticed instantly, more like a careful adjustment of pace. A hoe lifted a touch less vigorously. Cotton picked a little less quickly on a day when the overseer is distracted. A task stretched with the help of fatigue that is partly real and partly performed. This kind of resistance is difficult to quantify, which is precisely why it worked. It lived in the grey area between exhaustion and intention. Historians still argue over how much low-level sabotage truly affected plantation output, because records from owners often blamed weather, workers, seed quality, tools, or management without clearly recognizing resistance when it occurred. Yet testimony from formerly enslaved people makes plain that day-to-day, obstruction happened often enough to become part of plantation life. People broke what they were forced to maintain. They mislaid what others needed. They found ways to reclaim minutes from systems built on stolen hours. Domestic workers had their own opportunities. A woman in the kitchen might hear news and decide exactly whom to tell. She might under-season a dish for someone she hated and season another beautifully for someone in the quarters. She might move more slowly upstairs if a mistress had spent the morning being vicious. A seamstress could stitch with excellence while still choosing where to direct extra care and where not to. Resistance in the house often wore the mask of service, which must have been maddening for the household gods of politeness. Information itself became a tool. Women carried news through conversations that appeared casual, who was planning to travel, who had spoken with a trader, which children were being noticed, whether an owner's debt looked serious, whether a punishment threat sounded immediate or performative. A woman shelling peas beside a cabin could pass along crucial intelligence while sounding like she was simply commenting on the weather. The genius of such communication lay in its plainness. Children were often protected through these networks. A mother might urge an older child to stay near a certain elder. A girl might be told not to cross the yard alone after dark. A boy might be sent on an errand that also kept him out of an overseer's line of sight. Women observed which white men were dangerous, which routes were safer, which tasks placed girls in too much isolation, and which excuses could remove them from a room. This protective intelligence was resistance in one of its most urgent forms. One curious tidbit appears in scattered recollections of slavery. Some enslaved people used ordinary domestic signals to communicate more than white observers realized. a broom placed a certain way, a song sung at an unusual hour, a phrase with double meaning, a knock pattern, an item left on a doorstep. Evidence is uneven and local customs varied, but the broader truth holds: controlled people become inventive communicators when open speech is dangerous, meaning learns to travel disguised. You kneel by a child and retire shoe with unusual firmness, leaning close enough to whisper one sentence that must be remembered exactly. Stay by Aunt Dinah. Do not go near the gin house. The child nods, not fully understanding why, but understanding the seriousness. A great deal of resistance in plantation life looked like this. Not open defiance, but the quiet redirection of vulnerable bodies away from immediate harm. Theft was another common form of resistance, though the word hardly feels fair in context. To take food from a system built on stealing your labour, your family, and your life is not morally symmetrical with ordinary property crime. Enslaved women hid scraps of pork, handfuls of meal, fruit from orchards, eggs, cloth pieces, or small household goods. Such acts fed children, supplemented rations, and reclaimed value from a world that denied rightful ownership at every turn. Stealing time mattered too, a few extra minutes at the spring, an extended errand, a visit to another cabin under the excuse of borrowing thread, resting one hand on a fence post for 3 breaths longer than necessary, sitting for a moment in the shade with a baby before standing again. These fragments seem tiny because they are tiny. That is also why they mattered. A person deprived of control over whole days learns to treasure stolen minutes. Black women also resisted by preserving self-presentation, a neatly tied wrap, a carefully washed child, a song remembered in full, a recipe seasoned properly, hair braided with patience, a courtship honoured, a baby named after kin rather than according to the owner's convenience. Such actions did not topple slavery. They did insist on personhood. Under a regime that tried to reduce black women to labouring bodies, style and care became declarations of the human self. You hear laughter in the yard after sunset, and even that can carry resistance. Not every laugh, naturally. Some are simply laughs. But sustained humour in the face of domination has its own edge. Mocking a pompous overseer once he is out of earshot. Imitating a mistress's dramatic sigh. Telling a story that turns white pretension into comedy. Laughter can restore proportion. It shrinks the oppressor back down to human size, which is dangerous in the most liberating way. Women often served as custodians of memory, and memory itself resisted slavery's flattening force. They repeated names of absent kin, recounted marriages, births, sales, and deaths, taught children who belonged to whom, and kept alive stories that the plantation economy would have preferred to erase. A girl who knows her grandmother's name, her mother's birthplace, and the shape of her family line is harder to turn into pure inventory in her own mind. Historical continuity can function as inward rebellion. Scholars continue to debate how often enslaved women participated directly in escape planning compared with men, because narratives and public memory have tended to foreground male fugitives, or a few famous figures. Yet the evidence strongly suggests that women played crucial roles in hiding fugitives, gathering food, passing messages, misleading pursuers, and preparing children for movement when escape became possible. They may have fled less often with very young children because the risks were extreme, but that did not mean they were absent from resistance. Far from it. The risks were indeed severe. A woman thinking of escape had to reckon with geography, patrols, dogs, swamps, rivers, pregnancy, children, weather, and the chance of betrayal. Mississippi's landscape could conceal and expose at once. Canebrakes, woods, and low wet ground offered cover. They also offered snakes, insects, hunger, and getting lost. Mothers bore an especially painful calculation. Take a child and risk slowing the journey. Leave a child and risk losing the soul. There is no easy heroism in such choices, not all resistance aimed at running away. Some women resisted by remaining in place and protecting community structures with astonishing tenacity. A midwife passing on her knowledge. A mother teaching a daughter caution without teaching her despair. A cook feeding the quarters as well as the house when she could manage it. An elder settling conflict before it drew outside attention. These acts defended black life from internal exhaustion and external attack. They kept the community functioning under siege. Another understated form of resistance was selective truth-telling. A woman might know who took the missing ham and say nothing. She might know where a runaway hid for one night and calmly misdirect anyone asking. She might tell the mistress she had seen nothing, heard nothing, knew nothing. On a plantation, silence could be a shield placed around someone else. It required nerve because the price of being suspected could be terrible. One fringe detail from slavery-era folklore tells of women using cooking choices, herbal smells, or ordinary household routines to mask forbidden gatherings or movements. It is hard to verify individual cases, but the logic is persuasive. Strong smells confuse dogs. Busy kitchens create innocent traffic. A woman carrying a basket after dusk might simply look like she belongs to supper work. Domestic labour created camouflage. White households often overlooked the strategic possibilities of the very labour they depended on. You stand at a wash kettle, face damp with steam, while two other women exchange remarks that sound trivial to a passerby. The shirts are late. The road was muddy. Miss Sarah wants more candles. Hidden inside the rhythm of such remarks may be the news that a trader has arrived, that someone should not go near the porch tonight, that a child has been moved to another cabin for safety, that a meeting will happen by the trees. Resistance liked ordinary clothing. It dressed in chores and conversation. Poison appears in the historical imagination whenever slavery is discussed, and there were indeed white fears and accusations around poisoning by enslaved cooks or nurses. Some cases occurred, many accusations were likely exaggerated, racist fantasy, or convenient blame for ordinary illness. The historical record is muddy. What matters here is caution. Scholars still dispute how widespread such acts actually were. But the fear among slaveholders itself reveals something important. They knew, at least dimly, that the people forced to feed them had a reason to hate them. More clearly documented is the use of illness, or claimed illness, as resistance. A woman might exaggerate pain, limp more heavily, cough more dramatically, or remain in bed when she could stand. This was risky because women were often disbelieved, yet it sometimes won a little rest or shifted a task. The line between genuine sickness and tactical performance could blur, because people living under relentless labour were so often genuinely unwell anyway. Resistance did not always look strong. Sometimes it looked like weakness strategically displayed. There was also resistance in teaching children inner distance from the plantation's ideology. A mother could not openly tell a child the whole political truth in every setting. She could still teach that white authority was not moral authority. She could model skepticism through tone, caution, and the way she interpreted events. Children notice who adults truly respect. They notice when courtesy is only surface deep. This quiet education shaped consciousness long before open rebellion became possible. You sit by the fire and hear an older woman tell a tale that sounds like amusement for children. An animal tale, perhaps, with a clever rabbit or sly bird surviving against a stronger foe. The children laugh. The adults laugh too, but differently. Folk tales within enslaved communities often carried layered meanings about cunning, survival, reversal, and the defeat of brute force by intelligence. A story could entertain and instruct at once. The lesson need not be announced to be absorbed. Religious life could also nurture resistance. A spiritual about crossing water, going home, or deliverance might comfort, but it might also sharpen longing for actual freedom. Secret prayer meetings created spaces where white power did not fully define reality. To believe that bondage was not ordained forever was already a kind of opposition. Women who led songs, interpreted scripture, or sustained hidden gatherings were helping to cultivate moral resistance, which often precedes visible action. Scholars continue to examine whether the language of everyday resistance risks romanticizing survival strategies that were mainly defensive rather than transformative. It is a fair concern. Not every hidden act weakened slavery in measurable ways. Some merely made life livable for one more day, but livability itself mattered. A system that thrives on exhaustion is challenged whenever people preserve enough strength, humour, memory, and solidarity not to collapse into the roles assigned to them. That may be the deepest truth here. Resistance was not always about immediate victory. Often it was about refusing spiritual capture. A woman forced to scrub floors could still decide whom she trusted, what she remembered, how she mothered, when she laughed, how she prayed, and what she whispered to another woman in the yard. Those decisions lived in cramped spaces. Yes, they were real spaces all the same. Night on the plantation offers its own cover. The big house settles, lamps dim, the insects grow louder in the grass. A path between cabins gleams faintly under starlight. Someone moves along it carrying a bowl, or maybe news, or maybe both. A child sleeps safer in one cabin tonight because several women made that happen. A husband from a neighbouring plantation finds his wife's door because someone kept watch. A young girl avoids a summons because an older woman intervened just in time with another task. No monument will mark these victories. The people saved by them will remember. By the fire, faces flicker in warm orange and shadow. Tired hands shell peas or mend cloth or rub sore knees. The talk seems light. It is not empty. Beneath it lies a whole current of judgment, planning, care, and refusal. Black women on Mississippi plantations were never merely acted upon. They were constrained, exploited, threatened, and watched. Yes. They were also thinking constantly, choosing constantly, defending constantly. Their resistance did not always announce itself with noise. Often it survived precisely because it knew how to move quietly, and quiet can be powerful. Quiet can carry a warning across a yard. Quiet can hide a child, stretch a ration, confuse a pursuer, preserve a family story, or keep a cruel person from getting the information they want. Quiet can help a woman hold her own mind inside a system designed to invade it. Quiet can look like submission from the outside while sheltering something wholly different within. The night deepens, smoke drifts low, crickets answer one another from the weeds near the fence. A woman ties up the last bundle, lowers her voice, and says one final thing that sounds ordinary to anyone who's not listening properly. Another woman nods. That is all. The plan, the warning, the care, the resistance, whatever form it has taken tonight, moves forward without ceremony. In a world of overwhelming power, black women keep making room for one another to breathe, endure, and remain human on their own terms. At the end of a long day on a Mississippi plantation, darkness does not simply fall. It gathers. It settles over the fields, the road, the quarters, the sheds, the trees, and the big house with a kind of patient certainty. The light drains out of the sky in slow bands, pale gold fading to violet, violet fading to deep blue, and then the night takes hold. For black women in 1850 this hour can feel almost suspended. The day has finally loosened its grip, but the next one is already waiting somewhere beyond the stars. You step outside the cabin and let the evening air touch your face. The heat has eased a little. Not gone, just gentler. Crickets pulse in the grass. Frogs answer from wetter ground. A horse shifts in the distance and snorts once into the dark. Smoke from cook fires hangs low now, carrying the smell of ash, cornmeal, greens, and wood. It is a familiar smell, worn into the memory like a song repeated so often it becomes part of the body. This hour belongs to tired people. You can see it in the way bodies move. Slower now, careful now. A woman lowers herself onto a step and exhales, as if she's been holding her breath since morning. Another bends over a wash basin to rinse her hands, the water turning clouded grey with the dust of the day. A girl leans against a doorway, too sleepy to speak much. A grandmother reaches for a child without even looking, her arms knowing the shape by habit. The whole settlement feels softened around the edges, not by comfort exactly, but by weariness shared openly. Nightfall exposes a truth that the daytime order of the plantation tries hard to hide, under all the categories imposed from above. Field hand, cook, nurse, seamstress, breeder, servant, black women remain people with inner lives too large for the labels forced onto them. In the dark, you can feel this more plainly. The official world of commands and measurements grows quieter. Another world speaks in its place. Voices at cabin doors, soft laughter, private prayers, A child asking for a story, someone humming while banked coals glow red. There is grief in this hour too. Of course there is. Grief sits close to the skin on a plantation. A woman may think of a child buried years ago. Another may imagine a husband on another place, walking home by moonlight or perhaps unable to come at all. Another may hold silence around a mother sold away. Another may count daughters and worry over dangers not yet visible but already imaginable. Night does not remove these sorrows. It gives them more room to speak. You look up at the sky and see stars beginning to sharpen above the tree line. The stars over Mississippi in 1850 are the same stars seen from riverboats, from city streets, from fields farther north, from ships crossing the ocean, from villages far older than this plantation system. That thought can widen the chest for a moment. The plantation wants to feel like the whole world. The sky keeps refusing that lie. Some women step outside just for that feeling. A few minutes with no wall in front of the face, a little breeze along the neck, a moment not spent lifting, scrubbing, carrying, chopping, serving or hoeing. The body, even a tired body, notices such mercies. The skin cools. The shoulders drop half an inch. Breath moves more deeply. Relief on a plantation rarely arrives in large portions. It comes in fragments, and people become very skilled at receiving fragments. A child runs through the yard one last time before being called in. Bare feet slap softly over packed earth. Fireflies blink over the weeds like bits of wandering lantern light. Somewhere, from a neighbouring cabin, comes a laugh bright enough to cut through the fatigue. That laugh matters. It says the spirit has not gone flat. Humour remains alive, surprising everyone by showing up after so much labour, as if it never got the memo that the day had already used up all available energy. Some of the most revealing moments of plantation life happen when nothing dramatic appears to be happening at all. A woman unpins her headcloth and shakes out her hair with tired hands. Another scrapes the last bits from a pot, setting aside a little for dawn. A mother checks a sleeping child's chest with one light touch. A younger woman asks an elder about a courtship matter in a low, embarrassed voice. An old man clears his throat before beginning a story no one has heard in exactly this version. A teenage girl hums to herself while braiding the smallest child's hair for the night. This is life continuing in forms no account book can hold. Historians still argue over how much emotional privacy enslaved people could claim within the quarters, because cabins were crowded, walls were thin, and the demands of labour left little solitude. Yet even in such closeness, people clearly found ways to create inward space. A glance into the fire, a song sung under the breath, a short walk to the edge of the yard, a memory kept unspoken. Privacy does not always require being alone. Sometimes it exists in the mind's stubborn choice to remain partly its own. The ground underfoot holds the day's warmth a little longer. Dust clings softly to the skin at the ankles. The smell of pine boards, smoke, and cooling earth mixes with the faint sour sweetness of worn cloth drying near the door. You hear insects in overlapping rhythms, a night chorus so steady it almost becomes like water. The sounds of the plantation are different now from those of daytime. Less command, more breathing, less metal, more wood, leaf, voice, and hush. A black woman at this hour may finally let herself think thoughts she could not dwell on while working. Not always, because sometimes she's simply too tired to think much at all. But when thought comes, it can move strangely in the dark. It reaches toward memory. It reaches toward fear. It reaches toward hope. Though hope on a plantation is rarely naive, it has to live beside evidence. It has to survive contradiction. It has to endure without becoming foolish. Hope may take many shapes. A child gets through another fever. A husband arrives on Sunday. An overseer leaves. A cruel mistress softens with illness or distraction. A harvest goes well enough to ease punishments. News drifts in from outside. Someone speaks of free soil, of abolitionists, of escape routes, of uprisings long past, of rumours from the river. Hope does not need certainty to exist. It only needs some corner in which to sit quietly and refuse to die. One curious detail from recollections of enslaved life is how much people remembered moonlight. Not in a grand poetic sense only, but in practical, emotional ways. A bright moon could mean safer walking between plantations, more time outdoors, clearer paths, more visible faces, and a peculiar sense that the world had edges again after dark. Moonlight on a cabin roof, on a dirt path, on a water bucket, on a sleeping child's cheek. Such images stayed in memory because they offered beauty without asking permission. You watch the moon lift or imagine it behind a thin cloud, and the quarters take on a silvered look. Roof lines sharpen, shadows stretch long and quiet, smoke rises pale, the roughness of the cabins remains, but night grants everything a gentler surface. It is one of the strange mercies of darkness. It hides some scars while deepening others. Women at night often become custodians of the final tasks. Coals banked, dishes rinsed, small clothes hung, shoes set aside, babies settled, doors checked, water covered, food wrapped if there is any left to wrap. These rituals of closing the day carry meaning beyond function. They restore a little order where so much has been taken out of one's hands, to set a bowl in its place, to fold a cloth, to straighten bedding, to smooth a child's blanket, is to insist that life is not only what was done to you today. There is love here, not the polished sentimental kind praised in parlour books, but the muscular, practical love of tired people. A woman rubs an elder's shoulders with grease and herbs. Another shares the last corner of cornbread. Someone reties a head wrap for a friend whose hands ache too much to fuss with the knot. A mother tells a child, half laughing, half warning, not to kick off the blanket again. An older sister lets the smallest one sleep with a hand curled into her dress. These gestures are quiet, but they carry immense weight. They say you're not alone in this place, however much the system tries to isolate. Scholars continue to debate how often enslaved communities could sustain durable optimism about freedom in 1850 Mississippi, a time when the cotton economy was still booming and legal slavery remained powerful. Some evidence suggests deep despair. Other evidence shows persistent expectation, rumour, religious confidence, and political awareness travelling through the quarters and across the South. Perhaps the most honest answer is that people held both: exhaustion and expectation, terror and tenacity. No single emotional note can contain lives lived under such pressure. Children are usually the clearest proof of this complexity. They sleep with complete trust one moment and absorb adult tension the next. They laugh at stories, ask odd little questions, fight sleep fiercely, and wake crying from dreams no one fully understands. They are the future in a place designed to claim the future for the master class. A woman watching a child breathe may feel something almost too fierce to name. Fear, yes, also determination. So much of black women's labour on plantations involved keeping children alive long enough to inherit more than bondage in their own minds. A woman may also think of things she wants remembered, even if she does not phrase it like that. Names, birthdays, if known, places of origin, which ancestor came from which region, which aunt had a beautiful singing voice, which brother was sold toward the river, which grandmother knew roots and remedies, which child had her father's eyes. Memory at night becomes a form of resistance against disappearance. To remember accurately is to deny the plantation complete control over the story. The night air grows cooler, a breeze touches the yard and stirs the edge of hanging cloth. Somewhere a fiddle begins faintly, not close enough to see, just enough to hear its thin, bright line rising through the dark. Music at this hour can sound almost unreal, as if the night itself has found a way to hum. A few people smile without meaning to. The body answers music before the mind organizes why. Not every night contains song. Some are too heavy. Some are broken by bad news, punishment, illness, or storms. Yet even then there may be a story, a prayer, a joke, a remembered saying from an elder. Human beings keep making meaning from scraps. Black women on plantations were especially practiced at this. They took what little the day had not crushed and turned it into care. A bowl of broth, a warning, a remedy, a laugh, a song, a name repeated correctly. There is a kind of wisdom that grows only in harsh conditions, and it can be seen in the women of the quarters at night. Not because suffering is noble, it is not. but because people forced to endure often become sharp readers of what truly matters. They know the value of food, time, trustworthy speech, warm cloth, honest prayer, useful herbs, steady company, and memory. They know what can be spared and what must be defended. They know how to measure character quickly. They know the difference between appearance and substance better than the people in the big house ever will. One fringe detail from oral memory suggests that some women mark time at night not by clocks, but by recurring sound patterns. The second owl call, the late train of frogs after heavy rain, the distant bell from the house, the cooling of the hearth, the point when the moon cleared a particular tree. Whether exact or not, the idea feels right. In a world where official time belonged to others, people still made intimate calendars from sound and sky. And still, for all this strength, the tiredness is real. Your feet ache, your back burns in a low steady band, your hands feel swollen or rough or stiff, eyes sting from smoke and dim light. Fatigue settles not just in the muscles but behind the thoughts themselves. You may drift while sitting upright. You may forget the middle of a sentence. You may feel the day's labour still moving through your arms, as if they are not yet convinced the work is over. Survival is never romantic at this hour. It is simply what is happening. Yet one more thing is happening too. The self is gathering itself back from the day's dispersal. In daylight, plantation labour breaks the person into tasks. Hands for work, back for carrying, mouth for answering, eyes for watching danger. At night, in the cabin or at the doorway, those pieces come back into relation. You become again a mother, daughter, friend, wife, healer, believer, jokester, thinker, mourner, and dreamer. Not only a labouring body counted by someone else, this inward restoration may be incomplete. It is still precious. The stars are bright now, fixed above the dark shape of the trees. A child murmurs in sleep. A woman covers the coals. Another closes the door. Another remains on the step a minute longer, face lifted to the air, listening to the insects and the faint movement of leaves. The plantation around her is still what it is: brutal, controlling, greedy, restless. But the night has given her back some quiet part of herself, and in that quiet, hope remains. Not loud hope, not easy hope, not the kind that makes speeches. This is a tougher thing, a hope that survives because women keep one another alive, a hope that sits beside grief without denying it, a hope shaped by prayer, memory, children, stories, gossip, herbs, songs, names, moonlight, and the simple fact of another dawn met and endured. Such hope may seem small to outsiders. It is not small at all. It is what kept so many lives from collapsing inward under the weight of slavery. Now the cabin settles fully. Breath evens out in the dark. The smell of smoke lingers softly in blankets and hair. Outside, the field lies hidden beyond the quarters, waiting for morning as it always does. Inside, the people who worked, worried, fed, mended, comforted, resisted, and remembered finally let their bodies sink towards sleep. The night holds them for a while, and as the sounds grow softer, you let the whole plantation drift farther away. The hard rows of cotton blur into shadow. The big house dims until it is only a shape against the sky. The yard becomes still. Crickets continue their patient music, steady and low. Somewhere, just beyond sight, leaves turn gently in the breeze. You breathe in the coolness that arrives at last and feel it move through a body that has carried too much for too long. The rough blanket over you is not soft, but it is warm enough. The pillow is no more than folded cloth or straw, yet your tired head yields to it all the same. The floor no longer matters, the walls no longer matter. Even the next day, waiting out there in the dark, can be set aside for a few moments more. Around you, others sleep or drift towards sleep, each with private burdens, private memories, private pieces of courage tucked away where no overseer can touch them. The voices of the day have gone quiet now. No orders, no calls, no measured steps hurrying you onward. only the low living sounds of rest, of children breathing, of coals settling into ash, of the night carrying on with or without human sorrow. And in that hush, the women of the quarters are still themselves, not erased, not owned in the deepest sense, still holding names, songs, kin, prayers, skills, and those small inward lights that refuse to go out. So you let the darkness soften around the cabins and the trees. You let the stars remain above the Mississippi sky, clear and calm and far beyond the reach of any plantation fence. You let the field disappear. You let the road disappear. You let the ache in your back ease by slow degrees, and the thoughts in your mind loosen their grip one by one. There is nothing more to carry tonight. Only the hush of leaves, only the breath of sleeping children, only the fading warmth of the hearth, only the wide dark sky. And in that quiet at last you rest,